Chapter 2207. He actually ran into the lava. Does he want to die? God damn it. This Jianshun would rather die than let us obtain the girl. Many divine kings cursed. None of them dare to move. They were not bold enough to charge into the lava recklessly like Jianshun. In reality, even if there were experts who ranked in the top 10 of the divine king, they would not dare to enter the lava alone under the protection of the god artifact, unless they worked together and unleashed the full power of the god artifact. Only then would they be able to last for a while. It's not the first time Jianshun has entered the lava. It's said that he was thrown into the lava several years ago. Everyone thought he was dead, but isn't he still alive? Be careful, everyone. This is Jianshun's scheme. He wants to paralyze us and then change his position in the lava so that he can escape in another direction. That's right. Jianshun has a way to survive in the lava. Everyone, spread out. We can't let him escape under our noses. Jianshun had already taken out the Inata Tower as soon as he entered the scorching lava. He hid in it and steered the Inata Tower towards the very depths. He expanded the Inata Tower to several hundred meters in size and rampaged through the lava. He smashed through many rocks at the bottom of the lava and pierced through several volcanoes, causing a great disturbance. Jianshun's actions directly affected the surface of the lava. The entire sea of lava suddenly became turbulent, and several volcanoes in the surroundings directly collapsed. Huge mountains fell into the lava, causing flames to fill the air. The fire element in the entire space became abnormally violent. All the volcanoes were stimulated, erupting together. Lava rained down on the 8th floor. God damn it, what's going on? Why did something so great happen all of a sudden? It must be Jianshun. It must be that bastard Jianshun's doing. Just what is he doing in the lava? The divine kings gathered there all began to curse. They hated Jianshun to the core. They all donned their armor as they dodged the lava rain in horrible shape. Their faces were sunken. I'm very curious about what Jianshun is relying on to survive in the lava for so long and cause such a great disturbance, Jianshun said with a frown. Sheng Man had already become illusionary under her large cloak as she spoke with her old and hoarse voice. Jianshun must have a god artifact of quite a high grade. It's extremely likely that he's using it to survive in the lava, Zhuan said sternly as he constantly shot out streaks of light to disperse the lava rain above him. The divine kings nearby all spoke up when they heard that. Even low-quality god artifacts can't last for long in the lava. The bottom of the lava can even melt low-quality god artifacts. Does Jianshun have a medium-quality god artifact on him? Even infinite primes will struggle to unleash 10% of the power of medium-quality god artifacts. They're usually controlled by chaotic primes. It's impossible for Jianshun to control them with his mere cultivation as a divine king. Even if he has gained the recognition of the artifact's spirit, it's impossible for him to use such a powerful god artifact with his cultivation as a divine king. Alright, there's also a small, damaged tower on Jianshun. It's appeared many times in the past. Do you think it's the tower? The tower is already so damaged. I think it's about to be destroyed. A god artifact that's about to be destroyed is basically useless apart from its tough material. It doesn't have any divine might at all. So what can it do? That's not necessarily true. Even if a high-grade god artifact is damaged, it can still remain unscathed in the lava with its toughness. If Jianshun really can move about freely in the lava with a god artifact that's about to be destroyed, just what grade is the god artifact? Is it medium quality or high quality? Jianshun hid in the Inata Tower in the depths of the lava. He controlled the Inata Tower to move about randomly like a headless fly. Lava lizard, where are you hiding? Come out, come out. Jianshun prayed inside the Inata Tower. He waited eagerly and excitedly for the lizard to appear. He had planned everything out long ago. A plan to deal with the several hundred supreme divine king outside was silently carried out. He would draw out the lava lizard hidden at the bottom of the lava and use its terrifying strength to deal with the divine king outside. At this moment, Jianshun clearly felt the Inata Tower tremble gently. This immediately made Jianshun's eyes light up. He rejoiced, and even his breathing became ragged uncontrollably. This was because the tremors were definitely not caused by the Inata Tower crashing into the rocks. Instead, it had been attacked by the lava lizard. "I've finally alarmed you." Jian Chun stood on the first floor of the Inata Tower with a 9-star sword of heavenly ways in hand. He was secretly overjoyed. With a flash, he left the Inata Tower and appeared outside. Immediately, scorching lava squeezed over, burning Jinshin's chaotic body bright red. Jinshin did not care about the lava in the surroundings at all. His eyes immediately locked onto a huge, black figure. It was the lava lizard that had been living here for a long time. Its 2 eyes were several feet in size. Its 2 eyes, which were several meters wide, stared at the Inata Tower unblinkingly. Jinshin did not stay any longer after learning the lizard's exact location. He immediately entered the Inata Tower and flew it high into the air. He arrived above the lizard's head and viciously smashed it down. Bang! With a thud, the Inata Tower struck the lizard's head with terrifying force due to its toughness. The lizard immediately began to see stars. Its huge head shook as if it was drunk. However, it returned to its senses very soon. The pain from its head drove it mad. Its huge eyes were filled with fury as it directly swung its claw at the Inata Tower, knocking it several hundred meters away. Jian Chun stabilized the Inata Tower. He had not stopped there. He turned the Inata Tower into a cone and pointed it at the lizard. He used the Inata Tower's greatest speed to collide with it again, causing the lizard's colossal body to tumble a few times in a row. This time, the lizard clearly felt even more pain than before. It roared at the sky, causing the lava in the surroundings to churn. Its eyes had already become blood red as it charged at the Inata Tower furiously. The Inata Tower immediately rose into the air and flew above the lava. As for the lava lizard, it chased after him relentlessly. It was extremely furious. The lava is becoming more and more violent. The waves have actually reached a height of 3,000 meters. This has never happened before. Just what is that bastard Jinshin doing down there? Chapter 2208. All the supreme divine kings hovered 10,000 meters in the air as they stared at the churning sea of lava. The light in their eyes flickered as they became uneasy. At this moment, the lava sea could no longer be described as turbulent. The entire lava sea was violently fluctuating, and huge waves kept rising and falling, slapping high into the sky. It was getting more and more violent, as if there was an angry dragon overturning the seas and rivers inside. All the supreme divine kings present shivered in fear when they saw this. They felt a chill run down their spines. This was because the lava was no ordinary lava. It was thousands of times hotter than the core of the sun. It was something that even infinite primes needed to deal with carefully. Suddenly, a damaged tower that was several hundred meters tall flew out of the lava, directly surging into the sky. The moment they saw the tower, all the supreme divine kings rejoiced. Immediately, a divine king charged towards the Inata Tower. However, not everyone was like that. There were quite a few people who glanced at the Inata Tower before looking at the swollen lava below them. Clearly, they had sensed something, so they became stern. "Something's off. There's something under the lava," a divine king growled. With that, the lava below them suddenly exploded. A fire-red, abnormally huge lizard suddenly charged out. Its huge eyes were filled with anger as it stared at the Inata Tower. With a swing of its tail, it struck the Inata Tower at an unbelievable speed with a sonic boom, producing a heavy thud. Naturally, the Inata Tower was unscathed. It only drifted 100 meters away from the lizard's swing. On the other hand, the lava lizard cried out in pain. It grimaced in pain, but it also aroused its ferocious nature. Its eyes were filled with bloodlust. Primordial Realm. Primordial Realm. This is a vicious beast that has truly reached the primordial realm. No, that's impossible. Once someone reaches the primordial realm, it's impossible for them to enter the Poseidon Palace. How can a magical beast at the primordial realm appear here? This presence is definitely not an early infinite prime. It's even more powerful than that. Heavens, have my eyes gone blurry? How can such a terrifying existence appear in the Poseidon Palace? It's a fourth heavenly layer infinite prime at the very least. That's mid-infinite prime. Let's go. We're not its opponent. Jinshin, you bastard, you've actually lured out such a terrifying beast. I'll never spare you. Around them, looking at the huge lizard that suddenly jumped out of the lava, everyone was shocked, and huge waves of shock surged in their hearts. Jinshin appeared above the Enita Tower with a 9-star sword of heavenly ways in the sky. With a wave of his hand, he stowed the Enita Tower away. He looked at the Divine King in the surroundings, whose expressions had become extremely interesting. He could not help but laugh aloud. Everyone, this lizard is far too powerful. I'm weak, so I'm unable to defeat it at all, so I can only trouble you. Don't worry too much. There's so many of you, so as long as you work together, I believe you'll definitely be able to kill this lizard. As for me, I won't be of any help if I stay. Instead, I'll make it so that you won't be able to focus on dealing with this lizard. As a result, I can only go first. With that, Jinshin took out a cosmic movement talisman and vanished into thin air. He had already left the floor. Jinshin, you're despicable. All the Divine King gritted their teeth, but they did not dare to stay for long. They all distanced themselves from the lizard and fled in all directions. The lizard's original target was Jinshin. Now that Jinshin had vanished, it naturally vented all its fury on the surrounding Divine King. With a swipe of its tongue, it directly wrapped around a Divine King and swallowed him. With a swipe of its claws, 2 Divine Kings' bodies directly collapsed. Their souls were wiped out. With a sweep of its tail, a large swathe of Divine Kings behind it were reduced to pieces. For a moment, the infuriated lizard began a massacre on the 8th floor. It was invincible, and no one could stop it. In just a short while, the Divine Kings suffered heavy casualties. If this lizard was a first heavenly layer infinite prime, I would be able to fend it off. However, it's too powerful, so I can only leave first. Shengman had already become illusionary under her large cloak. As she said that, she directly charged towards the entrance to the 7th floor. However, at this exact moment, the lizard opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of scorching flames. It enveloped the entire region and swallowed Shengman and the 6 other Divine Kings. The 7 Divine Kings were trapped in the flames, and they immediately cried out in pain. In just a few seconds, 2 Divine Kings had been reduced to ashes, while the remaining 5 were heavily injured. They charged out of the sea of flames. Shengman's cloak had been burnt away, revealing her true appearance. It was a white-haired face that was filled with wrinkles and vicious wounds. At this moment, she was enveloped by the gentle light of a bronze mirror on her chest. From the pulses that the bronze mirror gave off, it was clearly a defensive god artifact. However, even with the protection of the god artifact, she was still burnt. She was quite injured. This lizard is at the 7th heavenly layer of infinite prime at the very least, or even the 8th heavenly layer. It's already late infinite prime. It's impossible for such a powerful existence to appear in the Azure Poseidon Palace, Zhuan exclaimed. Zhuan cried out in surprise. He had clashed with the giant lizard once, and was sent flying with a casual swipe of the lizard's claw. The divine armor on his body had also dimmed. They were not on the same level at all. I understand now. This lizard didn't come from the outside. It's an innate spirit formed from the power of fire in the lava after countless years. This seems to be the 7th floor of the Azure Poseidon Palace. Jinshin looked at the rather familiar landscape, and his eyes gradually lit up. It really is the 7th floor? I never thought that the cosmic movement talisman would actually send me here. Very soon, Jinshin confirmed his location. The light in his eyes flickered, and then he suddenly looked at the entrance to the 8th floor. Cold, killing intent immediately filled his eyes. Swish! In the next moment, Jinshin had already shot off. Sword light flickered around him, and like a bolt of lightning, he charged towards the entrance as quickly as he could. Jinshin moved so quickly that he could truly cross thousands of kilometers in a single instance. Before long, he had crossed the endless landscape and arrived at the entrance to the 8th floor. Just at this moment, a supreme god king in damaged armor who had been burnt to a crisp arrived on the 7th floor from the 8th floor. Clearly, he had narrowly escaped death on the 8th floor. By the time he made it to the 7th floor, he was heavily injured and extremely weak. He did not have much battle prowess left. However, the Divine King did not seem to feel any pain at all. Seeing how he had successfully left the world of volcanoes, he could not help but laugh aloud. He felt like he had just survived a disaster. This was because he had personally witnessed several Divine Kings, who were even more powerful than him, die to the lizard without being able to put up any resistance at all. He felt extremely fortunate that he had managed to escape from the jaws of death. However, at this moment, there was a flash of cold light. A sword suddenly appeared, stabbing towards his forehead with lightning speed. Chapter 2209. The Divine King paled in fright. He had just escaped death, so he was in a relaxed state. Coupled with the fact that he had never thought that someone would be lying in ambush here, he was unable to dodge the sudden attack at all. Spurt! The sword shone with a starry light. With lightning speed, it stabbed into the Divine King's forehead, wiping out his soul on the spot. Jianshan slowly drew the 9-star sword of heavenly ways as he stared at the corpse coldly. He showed no pity at all as he casually took away the space ring. "You've hunted me down for so long, so it's time for you to pay back some interest," Jianshan murmured. As he said that, the 9-star sword of heavenly ways shone brightly as well. Vaguely, for stars seemed to appear, directly slashing towards the exit before him. Spurt! When Jianshan slashed out, a Divine King just happened to descend from the 8th floor as if he was fleeing for his life. Before he could even react, Jianshan had beheaded him. Immediately, blood spurted into the air. Jianshan, the Divine King, bellowed out furiously. He was both surprised and furious, but before he could even summon his soul, Jianshan's second attack had arrived. It cleaved his head in half, wiping out his soul. Ignoring how heavily injured the Divine Kings were in the 8th floor and how much of their battle prowess they still had, every single one of them believed that they had escaped from the lizard when they successfully made it to the 7th floor. They could not help but rejoice from surviving a disaster, so they lowered their guard to the lowest possible level. Jianshan, on the other hand, was always prepared, ready to unleash his most powerful attack at any time. Therefore, his action of waiting for the rabbit to show up naturally achieved a very significant effect. After 2 breaths of time, another person descended from the 8th level. Jianshan executed the same move as before, and he didn't give the person any time to react or prepare before he stabbed out with his sword. It was swift like a bolt of lightning, and it directly pierced through the person's forehead and killed him on the spot. However, there were a total of 4 people who came down this time. When Jianshan killed the first person, the other 3 also noticed his presence. "Jianshan, how bold of you to remain here," Yi Futian sneered. One of the burly men bellowed out. When he saw the person Jianshan had killed, he immediately became furious. He bellowed out, "You actually killed the successor of the solitary sword lineage, Gongzhong. The solitary sword lineage will not spare you." Jianshan's expression froze. Because there was no one he was familiar with on the 8th floor, he had to stand guard here. As soon as he saw someone come down, he would immediately attack. There was no time to identify who it was. Only now did he discover in surprise that the supreme god king he had killed was actually one of the 8 people who had attacked him before, the successor of the solitary sword lineage, Gongzhong. However, Gongzheng's dazzling, golden robes were in tatters now. They had become pitch black, having lost their golden luster. Even his entire body had almost been burnt to a crisp. "By Legmont, do it!" The burly man who called out was Jianna, who had protected Gongzheng by Yi and Songing before. Jianna bellowed out and attacked Jianshan with the other 2 at the same time. Bai Yi's gaze was cold. Without any hesitation, he took out his metal rod and attacked Jianshan as hard as he could. Jianna took out his god artifact as well, launching an attack as soon as he could. Aside from Legmont, all 3 of them possess god artifacts. However, Legmont only used supreme quality saint artifacts. It was 3 against 1, so they possessed an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. Moreover, Jianna ranked within the top 100 of the Divine King's seat, making him extremely powerful. However, the 3 of them were like Gong Zheng. They had been heavily injured on the 8th floor, where some of their skin had been burnt to a crisp. Their true battle prowess was obviously nowhere near their peak condition. On the other hand, Jianshun was at his peak condition. With the god artifact, the 9-star sword of heavenly ways, his battle prowess had increased drastically. As a result, Jianshun did not lose the upper hand against the 3 of them. Instead, he gained a slight advantage. Spurt. After just a few exchanges, Jianna vomited blood. His face was extremely pale. He had not been injured by Jianshun. Instead, he had been swept by the lizard's tail on the 8th floor, directly taking away half of his life. Now that he was fighting against Jianshun, his injuries had worsened. "Let's go." Jianna bellowed out and stopped fighting. He called out to the 2 of them and fled into the distance. "You want to leave? It won't be that easy." Jianshun snorted coldly. A strand of profound sword chi shot out, catching up to Jianna in a single moment and entering his soul. Jianna cried out miserably as he plummeted from the sky. His soul had almost dispersed. He was so heavily injured that he did not even have the strength to run anymore. At the same time, 4 huge stars appeared from Jianshun's 9-star sword of heavenly ways. They collided with Bai Yi's metal rod. Bai Yi grunted out. The web between his thumb and forefinger cracked, and his fingers broke. The metal rod flew out of his hands. However, Jianshun's 9-star sword of heavenly ways did not lose all momentum after knocking away Bai Yi's god artifact. It stabbed into Bai Yi's head with its remaining might. Just like that, Bai Yi died. Without Jianna and Bai Yi holding him back, Legmont naturally could not last for long when he was injured. He was slain by Jianshun very soon. Afterwards, Jianshun arrived before Jianna, who clutched his head and wailed out. He mercilessly ended Jianna's life. Jianshun removed Jianna's space ring and picked up his god artifact. The god artifact was a huge sword that was as wide as a hand. Aside from the sword, Jianshun also discovered a thumb-sized bead on Jianna's corpse. The bead was also a god artifact. 2 god artifacts, one for attack and one for defense. It looks like Jianna is just too heavily injured, so he can only use 1 god artifact. Jianshun murmured before picking up Bai Yi's metal rod. He tossed it into the Inatak tower as well. After thinking about it, Jianshun suddenly took out the space rings he had obtained. After rummaging through them, he took out several dozen formation discs in one go. Afterwards, he carefully made his way to the 8th floor with the discs, setting them all up at the entrance with lightning speed. After setting everything up, Jianshun did not even look at them. He turned around and left, returning to the 7th floor. These formation discs were either for attack or defense. They were of quite high quality. Jianshun placed over a dozen formation discs together, forming a barrier at the entrance of the 8th floor, preventing people from coming down. "God damn it, bastard. Who's so despicable as to block the way down?" Jianshun could vaguely hear furious roars, which filled him with great joy. Several divine kings on the 8th floor stared at the barrier created by the formation discs as their faces paled from anger. "Let's work together and destroy these formations." "These formations won't last much longer," said a divine king in a hurry. However, just when they were about to take action, the lizard glanced over as well. With a swipe of its tongue, it dragged a supreme god king into its mouth. The faces of the other supreme god kings paled in fright as they fled in all directions. "We can't go down to the 7th floor. Let's go to the 9th floor. Quick, quick, quick." Immediately, all the divine kings who had fled to the 7th floor charged towards the 9th floor. Chapter 22:10. All the supreme divine kings gathered on the 8th floor of the Poseidon Palace fled for their lives. They all pushed their speed to the limit, and some of them even burned their essence blood, paying a heavy price to use secret techniques to flee for their lives. The lizard was just too powerful. It was a 7th heavenly layer infinite prime at the very least, or even an 8th heavenly layer infinite prime. Even though it was not too far away from chaotic prime, it was not something they could deal with. Even Ju 1, who ranked second among the divine kings and possessed battle prowess that allowed him to kill regular primordial realm experts, was not much more powerful than an ant before the lizard. Zhu Shengman, and the divine king who grasped the laws of death fled for their lives as well. The three of them used secret techniques to erupt with terrifying speed, crossing 10,000 kilometers in a single instance. They were at the very front, getting closer and closer to the entrance of the ninth floor. At this moment, excitement filled their eyes as if they could already see themselves entering the ninth floor and escaping with their lives. However, at this moment, a huge volcano flew through the air. With a sweep of the lizard's tail, the huge volcano was sent flying. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or intentional, but the huge volcano smashed right into the entrance to the ninth floor, covering the entrance and cutting off everyone's path of retreat. No! All the supreme divine kings roared out in regret when they saw this. Despair filled their hearts. If it were any other time, they would have been able to smash the volcano to pieces with their strength. Even if the rocks of the volcano were extremely tough and could be used as materials for forging artifacts, they would still be able to smash the volcano to pieces as long as they had time. But now, there was a terrifyingly powerful lizard here. They did not have the time to do that. They would probably be wiped out before they could even clear the path. Not only could they not return to the 7th floor right now, but they could not return to the 9th floor either. They had truly been trapped on the 8th floor. Zhu also gritted his teeth. Madness filled his eyes as he called out, "Since we can't escape, let's throw our lives at it. If we fight alone, only death awaits us, but there are several hundred of us, and we have god artifacts for several decades. If we form a formation and fight to the death, it's not like we have no chance at all." Jinshin no longer paid any attention to the situation on the 8th floor. Right now, he was about to leave the 7th floor and fly towards the 6th floor of the Poseidon Palace. He had been summoned by Jinshin as well. He followed Jinshin closely, guiding Jinshin from time to time. "I can sense it. They're in that direction. Master, the people you told me to remember seem to be together." Heya said as he pointed at Jinshin when they arrived on the 5th floor. "Well done, Heya." Jinshin was in high spirits. He seemed to be in a much better mood. Immediately, he hurried off in the direction Heya had pointed. Several million kilometers away on the 5th floor, Mingdong, Adriana, Shui Yunlan, Rui Di, and Ji of the Dragon and Phoenix clans gathered together. I really never thought that Mingdong would actually come from the Tian Yuan continent. I've heard from the seniors of my clan that our sect of dragons and phoenixes originally lived on the Tian Yuan continent, but we moved to the Beast God continent with the Beast God. The Tian Yuan continent is our ancestral land. Rui Di looked at Mingdong excitedly. His gaze towards Mingdong was particularly close. "Mingdong, tell us what the Tian Yuan continent and the Beast God continent are like. What's the situation like now?" Ji also stared at Mingdong with shining eyes. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. "Now's not the time to talk about that. Let's think of a way to help my brother," Mingdong said in a low voice. His face was sunken, and he was stern. He was unable to cheer up no matter what. Suddenly, a flash of light appeared in the gloomy night sky that was only illuminated by the faint moonlight of the full moon. It shot through the sky like a bolt of lightning, shining with blinding light as it approached Mingdong and the others. The worry on Mingdong's face completely vanished when he saw the streak of light. He was overjoyed. Shui Yunlan and Aladona were clearly relieved when they saw the flash of light. They were all supreme god kings, so their senses were extraordinarily great. As soon as the streak of light appeared, they recognized Jian Chun, who was wrapped in it. However, when they saw that only Jianshan and Heya had arrived, they became confused and curious. "Jianshan, where are the divine kings chasing you?" Mingdong went up to them enthusiastically. He looked behind Jianshan cautiously. He was extremely confused. "They're all on the 8th floor." Jianshan did not hide anything, telling them about the lizard. The moment they heard about the existence of the giant lava lizard, all of their expressions changed slightly. It was obvious that they were stunned. "Mingdong, I never thought that in just a few hundred years, you would have reached the level of a divine king, and you have so many god artifacts on you. Looks like you've been doing pretty well in the saint's world in the past few years. You made me worry for you for so long. Jianxin studied Ming Dong before glancing at the 5 divine generals behind him. He felt happy for Ming Dong from the bottom of his heart. Only now did the 2 brothers who had been separated for several hundred years have the time to catch up. How can I compare to you? The reason why my strength has increased so quickly is because I have an inexhaustible supply of cultivation resources over the years. In addition to the powerful inheritance and various nurturing, it's impossible for me not to become strong. I'm not like you, who roamed the saint's world alone without any background, yet you managed to become a divine king in such a short amount of time. Moreover, you're probably only an early divine king right now, while I'm already a late divine king. I've basically reached the end of this level of cultivation, while you still have a lot of room for growth. Compared to you, I'm nowhere close, Ming Dong said in a depressed manner. Jianxin patted Ming Dong's shoulder and exchanged some simple greetings before looking at Shui Yunlan. He said, "Protector Shui, why are you in the Azure Poseidon Palace? Where's my sister? Did you take her into the Azure Poseidon Palace?" "Her Highness is fine now. She is in a safe place and did not follow me into Poseidon Palace," Shui Yunlan answered. Her voice remained cold and emotionless. However, her gaze towards Jianxin had some mixed feelings. She could not help but think of how weak Jianxin had been in her eyes back on the Tianyuan continent. He was not even comparable to an ant. Yet now, in just a few hundred years, Jianxin had already reached the same height as her, which left Shui Yunlan deeply shocked. As a matter of fact, she found it unreal. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 2211. Jianxin's talent is monstrous. His rate of growth is just far too fast. In just 300 to 400 years, he has gone from a puny mortal to a divine king, and his battle prowess is so great as well. He's only an early divine king, yet he possesses the battle prowess to kill a supreme divine king. He still hasn't reached the end of his path in the divine king realm. There's still a lot of room for improvement in the future. With his current battle prowess, even I won't be his opponent once he reaches the peak of the divine king realm, Shui Yunlan thought. Her expression was mixed, and light flickered in her icy cold eyes. But why is he from the immortals' world, and why is he the successor of the sword sect of Violet Heavens? The esteemed ice goddess was injured by the grand exalt of the sword sect of Violet Heavens in the past, and she still hasn't recovered. No one knows if she's still alive or not, and she doesn't even care about the betrayal of the Ice Goddess Hall. Jianxin and our Ice Goddess Hall will become enemies in the future. I wonder if I was right or wrong to help Jianxin while bearing the consequences of exposing my identity and placing the Ice Goddess in constant danger. Sigh, whatever. What Mo Tianyun said in the past was not without reason. The Ice Goddess Hall is currently facing an unprecedented danger, basically on the brink of destruction. We don't even know if we can make it through successfully, so what's the point of me continuing to think about these grievances? The matter at hand is to find a way to recover Her Majesty's strength. Only when Her Majesty recovers to her peak condition will she have the power to overturn the situation. Shui Yunlan sighed. Not only did Jianxin's rate of growth amaze her, but it also made her feel threatened and uneasy. After learning that Chanyang Mingwei had not entered the Azure Poseidon Palace with Shui Yunlan, Jianxin also became disappointed. He could not help but think of Chanyang Mingwei's familiar face at that moment. His childhood memories surged out like a fountain, filling Jianxin with fresh memories. Even after several hundred years, it still felt like it had happened yesterday. He clearly remembered that when he was young, Saint Force had tested him as a cripple who could not cultivate. His status in Chanyang Prefecture had plummeted from a dazzling new star to a level where even regular servants could mock and bully him as they wished. During that time, his father, Chanyang Ba, had neglected him. In the vast Chanyang Prefecture, aside from his mother, only his sister, Chanyang Mingwei, was the person who cared about him the most. She basically cared for him in every possible way, thinking about him at all times. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, this sibling relationship was nothing special, but to Jianxin, who had the memories of being an orphan, it had become a torch that warmed his soul. It touched his heart deeply, captivated him, and became a memory that he would never forget. It was deeply embedded in the depths of his soul. Jianxin had not seen his sister since he had parted ways with Changyang Mingyue on the Tianyuan continent. He missed her very much. Jianxin, do you come from the Tianyuan continent? At this moment, Rui Di stared at Jianxin eagerly as he asked nervously. A gleam of light immediately flashed through Jianxin's eyes when Rui Di mentioned the Tianyuan continent. There should be extremely few people who knew about the existence of the Tianyuan continent in the Saints' world. So how did this person know about it? Could it be you are? Jianxin looked at Rui Di. These two are Rui Di and Ji from the sect of dragons and phoenixes. The sect of dragons and phoenixes was brought to the Saints' world by the winged tigerback on the beast god continent. Aladona explained, explaining the identities of Rui Di and the others to Jianxin. What? You're the dragon and phoenix clans that left the beast god continent back then? Jianxin was extremely surprised after learning the identities of Rui Di and Ji. However, he soon felt overjoyed silently. He had just been worrying about how to help Rui Jin and Honglian find their clansmen who had left the Tianyuan continent 1,000,000 years ago in the vast Saints' world. He had never thought that he would come across people from the sect of dragons and phoenixes on this trip to Poseidon Palace. He was overjoyed and overjoyed. At this moment, Aladona suddenly smiled mysteriously. She said to Jianxin, Jianxin, look who this is. As she said that, a divine hall appeared in Aladona's hand. She gently tossed it into the air. The temple suddenly expanded in the sky, turning into a huge temple that was thousands of feet in size in an instant. With a muffled sound, it gently landed on the ground, picking up the dust on the ground. Jianxin looked at the divine hall in confusion and curiosity. He had no idea what Aladona was up to. At this moment, the door to the divine hall slowly opened. Afterwards, a woman in a purple dress walked out slowly with a zither in her arms. She was extremely beautiful and peerless. She gave off an otherworldly aura, making her seem like an otherworldly fairy. The moment he saw the woman, Jianxin seemed to be paralyzed. His body suddenly froze, and disbelief filled his handsome face. Mua! However, in the next moment, Jianxin suddenly cried out. Overwhelmed by his emotions, he charged over excitedly and hugged Shangwan Mu tightly. Jianxin, I knew you wouldn't die. Shangwan Mu struggled to remain calm when she saw Jianxin. She became emotional as she smiled faintly. She stowed away the zither of the demonic cry and hugged Jianxin gently, pressing her head against Jianxin's chest. As the saying went, absence made the heart grow fonder. After several decades of separation, Jianxin and Shangwan Mu had always worried about each other's safety in the dangerous Saints' world. Now that they had reunited, the feelings of longing they had suppressed immediately erupted like a geyser. Mu'er, how have you been in the Taoist sect of divine sound in the past few years? Have you been mistreated? Jianxin asked gently. His voice was filled with concern. Brother, there's a kid called Jun Kong who's interested in sister-in-law. You have to be careful. That kid's not weak. He's also a supreme divine king, and he has a god artifact on him. Ming Dong, who had already sat on the ground and consumed a god tear pill to heal, suddenly said to Jianxin, Jun Kong? Jianxin murmured. He stared at Shangwan Mu, in question. Jun Kong's master is one of the 4 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. At the same time, he's the person with the greatest talent in the Taoist sect of divine sound right now. He did indeed have improper thoughts about me in the past. When I came to the Azure Poseidon Palace this time, the ancestor of the Taoist sect of divine sound sent Jun Kong in the name of protecting me. Shangwan Mu told Jianxin about Jun Kong's story without hiding anything. Chapter 22:12. He actually wants to kill me? Jianxin was surprised when he heard that. Afterwards, his lips curled into a sneer. He looked at Shangwan Mu and asked sternly, Mu'er. Jun Kong is your senior brother. If I come into conflict with your senior brother in the future, what will you do? Although Jun Kong's master has once guided me, I've already helped Jun Kong when Ming Dong wanted to kill him last time. I didn't help him because we both came from the Taoist sect of divine sound. Instead, I helped him because I wanted to repay Jun Kong's master. As a result, if you want to kill Jun Kong, I won't object, Shangguan Mu'er, he said without hesitation. Afterwards, she hesitated again. She looked at Jianshan worriedly and continued. However, Jun Kong's master is a chaotic prime after all. Even his master's wife is one of the 4 ancestors of the Taoist sect of divine sound. If you really do kill Jun Kong, it'll probably lead to quite a lot of trouble. So what if he's a chaotic prime? I've offended so many supreme divine kings in the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Many of them have organizations that are far more powerful than the Taoist sect of divine sound. I don't even fear those people, let alone a single Jun Kong, Jianshan said fearlessly. Shangguan Mu'er thought about why Jianshan had been hunted down by so many divine kings in the cerulean Poseidon Palace when she heard that. She could not help but ask, what's up with the girl? Is she really the key to obtaining the cerulean Poseidon Palace? The girl's name is Xiaoman. She's the descendant of the previous master of the cerulean Poseidon Palace. She possesses the bloodline of the previous master of the Poseidon Palace. Jianshan did not hide anything and told everyone Xiaoman's story. None of the people gathered here were outsiders. Even Rui Di and Ji Yi were clansmen of the Dragon and Phoenix clans that had left the Beast God continent in the past. As a result, Jianshan trusted them very much. Moreover, the matter of Xiaoman had already spread through the cerulean Poseidon Palace. It was not difficult to guess the uniqueness of her bloodline with just a little thought. It was no secret at all, so there was no need for Jianshan to hide it. As soon as they heard that Xiaoman was the descendant of the previous master of the cerulean Poseidon Palace, Rui Di and Ji Ye's faces changed. They became slightly excited. Adriana, Shui Yunlan, and Ming Dong remained unfazed. Jianshan's eyes turned slightly cold when he saw Rui Di and Ji Ye's expressions. He said, I've already made an agreement with Xiaoman. I will help her take back the cerulean Poseidon Palace and retrieve her ancestors' legacy. The warning in Jianshan's words was extremely obvious. He had clearly expressed his attitude. Even if Rui Di and Ji Yi were clansmen of the Dragon and Phoenix clans, they would become his enemies if they tried to lay their hands on the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Rui Di and Ji Ye's faces changed slightly when they heard that. After a moment of silence, Rui Di said to Jianshan, the cerulean Poseidon Palace is extremely important. Ji Yi and I have come under the orders of the seniors of our clans. They want us to do everything we can to obtain the cerulean Poseidon Palace. However, since you're from our homeland, you're not an outsider, and the girl called Xiaoman has some ties with you. If the girl controls the cerulean Poseidon Palace, it might be a good thing for us. A gleam of light flashed through Aladona's eyes. She stared at Rui Di and Ji Yi sharply and said, since the seniors of your clans place so much importance on the cerulean Poseidon Palace, they must know just how serious the matters involved in the cerulean Poseidon Palace are. Obtaining the cerulean Poseidon Palace might not be a good thing for your sect of dragons and phoenixes. After all, your sect of dragons and phoenixes has only been established for 1,000,000 years. You don't have the heritage and strength to protect the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Jianshan was surprised as well. He could not help but look at Aladona curiously and ask, what else is involved in the cerulean Poseidon Palace? Shui Yunlan, Ming Dong, and Shangguan Mu'er all turned their heads to look at Adriana. They were curious as well. Aladona became stern and said, I've only heard a little about this from a hall elder after I returned to the God clan. I only know that the cerulean Poseidon Palace seems to be involved in the war between the Saints' world and the Immortals' world. I don't know the exact reason. However, the cerulean Poseidon Palace was destroyed by the Samsaric Grand Exalt of the Immortals' world because of that. Aladona sighed gently when she reached there. She stared at the world within the cerulean Poseidon Palace in a daze and sighed emotionally. That's because the cerulean Poseidon Palace directly led to an intense battle between two grand exalts. According to the records of our god clan, the grand exalt of ancient paths, one of the 7 grand exalts of our saint's world, never appeared again after his battle against the samsaric immortal exalt. Many peak experts of the saint's world had once said that the grand exalt of ancient paths was dead. The samsaric grand exalt of the immortal's world was heavily injured as well. When he fled to the immortal's world, he was intercepted by the blood-tier grand exalt of our saint's world. In the end, the samsaric immortal exalt's body was destroyed, and only his soul returned to the immortal's world. Afterwards, his soul entered samsara. Jian-shun was deeply stunned when he heard that. Originally, he thought that the samsaric immortal exalt had destroyed the Taoist sect of Neptunia only because of the war between the two worlds. He had never thought that there would be another reason. Although Jian-shun was also unable to understand the true reason, he deeply realized that the cerulean Poseidon Palace was definitely not as simple as a high-quality god artifact from Aladona's explanation. Rue D and Ji, you were stern as well. If everything that Aladona said was true, it really would not be a good thing for their sect of dragons and phoenixes to obtain the cerulean Poseidon Palace. Everyone continued to discuss the cerulean Poseidon Palace. After a while, Shui Yunlan suddenly arrived beside Jian-shun and said emotionlessly, "Jian-shun, come with me." With that, she directly made her way into the distance. Jian-shun stared at Shui Yunlan's back and became doubtful. He squeezed Shangguan Mu, her soft hand, and said, "I'll be right back." "All right." Shangguan Mu nodded gently as a sliver of gentleness appeared in her enchanting eyes. 100 kilometers away, Shui Yunlan condensed a barrier of ice around herself and Jian-shun. She stared at Jian-shun coldly and said, "Has the space ring that the 5th prince obtained from the Grand Prime statue on the 12th floor ended up in your hands?" "That's right. The space ring is on me. What do you want?" Jian-shun's eyes narrowed as he secretly became cautious. "I have an agreement with the 5th prince. I will fend off the invaders for him and make time for him. Everything he obtains, including all the cultivation resources, will belong to me." Shui Yunlan stared at Jian-shun. Jian-shun frowned when he heard that. He said, "That's a matter between you and the 5th prince. What does it have to do with me? Since I obtained the space ring, it belongs to me. Do you want me to complete the agreement between you and the 5th prince?" Jian-shun did not have a good impression of Shui Yunlan. Ignoring the fact that Shui Yunlan had committed such a heinous act on the Tianyuan continent, just the fact that she had sealed Ruijin, Honglian, and Black Fish and Ice on the icy plains was something that Jian-shun struggled to forgive. Shui Yunlan's face did not change at all. Her gaze remained cold, without any emotion at all. She said icily, "Of course it's related to you. Do you know why I've come to the cerulean Poseidon Palace? Why do you want to help the 5th prince? It's all because of your sister." "Sister? What's wrong with my sister?" Jian-shun's face changed when he heard her mention his sister. His gaze sharpened in a single moment as he stared at Shui Yunlan closely. He called out loudly as he became extremely uneasy inside. "P.S. Xiaoyao has clearly updated recently, but I've received many complaints from readers that I haven't updated today. There have even been some readers who have complained to me, saying that I haven't updated in many days." When Xiaoyao saw the news, he truly felt that he had been wronged. Xiaoyao would like to explain it to everyone here. Currently, the Chaos Sword God has a lot of reading platforms. All the platforms that charge a fee are authentic, but these platforms are not the first websites. We're the first websites. They're the platforms that can be seen immediately after the author's update. Only then are they the first websites. As for the other platforms, there will often be delays. There might even be a few platforms where the chapters will not be synchronized for several days, or they might even stop updating altogether. As a result, in order for everyone to keep up with the latest situation of the Chaos Sword God, please listen to Xiaoyao's WeChat account, Xingxingxiao 110. Chapter 22:13. Jian-shun was just far too concerned about his sister. As soon as he heard that Shui Yunlan had actually come to Poseidon Palace for his sister, he immediately believed that something bad had happened to his sister, or that she had been harmed in some way. A gleam of light immediately flashed through Shui Yunlan's cold eyes when she saw how intense Jianshan's reaction was. She said, "Don't worry, your sister is fine. She's in an extremely safe place." Jianshan immediately stopped worrying when he heard that his sister was fine. He slowly calmed down as well. He stared at Shui Yunlan with flickering eyes and said coldly, "Then why did you say that you came to Poseidon Palace for my sister? I want to know the reason." Shui Yunlan fell silent. She stared at Jianshan emotionlessly as the light in her eyes flickered slightly. Clearly, she was hesitating. Jianshan could clearly see Shui Yunlan's hesitation as well. He said, "If you don't plan on telling me the truth, then don't even think about getting anything from me. Even if you're very powerful, it won't be easy for you to keep me here. As a result, if you want to take it by force, I'd advise you to give up on that as soon as possible." Shui Yunlan seemed to see Jianshan's determination in his eyes. She sighed secretly. At that moment, she actually felt helpless inside. She had never thought that the insignificant figure that was even less than an ant in her eyes back on the Tianyuan continent would actually be bold enough to stand before her and threaten her fearlessly. While she sighed, she also found it rather difficult to accept. After quite a while of silence, Shui Yunlan still spoke in the end. She said with her icy cold voice that seemed to never change, "Your sister is the snow goddess of the ice goddess hall. She died in a battle in the past, but fortunately, her highness' soul was not destroyed. Instead, a sliver of her soul was left behind for her reincarnation. The great ice goddess used her own bloodline as a guide to calculate that her highness would reincarnate into a lower world, and she found the exact location. As a result, I was ordered to come to the Tianyuan continent and shoulder the heavy responsibility of searching for her highness. I waited on the Tianyuan continent for over 3 million years before I finally saw Her Majesty reincarnate. Originally, I wanted to take Her Majesty away from the Tianyuan continent once she reached a certain level of strength and directly return to the Ice Goddess Hall in the Saints' World. But at that moment, Mo Tenyun, who had disappeared from the Tianyuan continent for a long time, appeared. When Mo Tenyun was mentioned, Shui Yunlan's gaze became mixed as well. Jianshan was stunned when he heard the name Mo Tenyun. He could not help but think about when he had first discovered the Yinyang Saint Rock with Shangwan Mu'er. At that time, he had obtained a method of dual cultivation from Mo Tenyun, which allowed him to grasp the balance of yin and yang. As a result, he was able to absorb the energy from the Yinyang Saint Rock with Shangwan Mu so smoothly, increasing his strength drastically. However, they had only encountered a clone of Mo Tenyun back then, not Mo Tenyun himself. Shui Yunlan continued, "Mo Tenyun brought me news from the Saints' World. From him, I learned that something had happened to the Ice Goddess Hall in the Saints' World. Wu Han, who was one of the 4 great protectors like me, had actually colluded with Nan Patian of the Moon God Hall. She had already taken control of the Ice Goddess Hall and wanted to do something detrimental to the Ice Goddess. In the beginning, I was doubtful about this matter. I did not believe it completely. However, it was exactly because of Mo Tenyun's warning that I became cautious. When I returned to the Saints' World with Her Majesty, I did not return to the Ice Goddess Hall rashly. Instead, I changed my name and changed my appearance to investigate the Ice Goddess Hall. When she reached there, Shui Yunlan could not help but tremble gently. Undisguised anger rose up from the bottom of her heart, causing her exposed, icy-cold eyes to become stern. She said coldly, "I really refuse to believe that Mo Tenyun's news is actually true. Nan Patian of the Moon God Hall has actually colluded with Wu Han and taken control of the Ice Goddess Hall. Even the elders of the Ice Goddess Hall have fallen to their hands. The Ice Goddess Hall possesses an extremely vast amount of cultivation resources, as well as cultivation methods that are extremely suitable for Her Majesty to recover. Holy Emperor, originally, I only needed to take Her Majesty back to the Ice Goddess Hall. With the tremendous resources and heritage of the Ice Goddess Hall, it would not take long for Her Majesty to recover. However, now that the Ice Goddess Hall has been attacked, not only do I not dare to take Her Majesty back to the Ice Goddess Hall, but I even have to change my name and not expose our identities. Without sufficient divine crystals and heavenly resources, without the protection of a powerful organization, and having to hide your identity at all times to prevent Wu Han and Nan Patian from finding traces of your highness, it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for your highness to recover under these circumstances. Shui Yunlan's eyes became gloomy. Her icy cold voice was filled with bitterness as she said, I did not come to Poseidon Palace this time for the legacy. My main objective was to obtain some cultivation resources and help Her Majesty recover. As a result, when I saw someone gain the recognition of a Grand Prime's legacy, I assisted him without any hesitation at all. I only hoped that I could obtain the cultivation resources and the legacy from him, because Her Majesty really lacks cultivation resources right now. After learning the entire story from Shui Yunlan, Jianshan fell silent. He was not surprised by his sister's identity because he had already learned that she was the reincarnation of a great figure back on the Tianyuan continent. However, he did not care about that. The care and love his sister had shown him when he was young had already been engraved into his heart. As a result, no matter who his sister's true identity was, her position in his heart would never be shaken. However, he had never thought that his sister would have such a difficult time in the saint's world. This made his heart ache. It was not a good feeling. What are the cultivations of Nan Patian and Wu Han right now? Jinshan's eyes turned slightly cold as he asked sternly. He had once heard about Nan Patian from Fairy Hao Yue, and he had also learnt about Nan Potion's cultivation from Fairy Hao Yue. However, that was several 100,000 years ago. Nan Patian is a peak chaotic prime. It's said that he's only a step away from Grand Prime. As for Wu Han, she's an infinite prime. With Wu Han's talent, she's probably reached the peak of infinite prime after such a long time. She might even have broken through to chaotic prime, Shui Yunlan said sternly. Not only was she the most talented out of the 4 guards in the past, but she was also the most powerful. It was just that she had stayed on the Tianyuan continent for over 3 million years, which had delayed her progress. The Ice Goddess is one of the 7 Grand Exalts. Can Nan Patian and Wu Han control the Ice Goddess Hall so easily? Jianshan asked in doubt. Grand Exalts were experts who had truly reached the peak of Grand Primes. They were true sovereigns of the world, existences that were like the laws of the world. Even with the entire Saint's world in perspective, there were only a handful of them, yet they were forced into a passive position by a chaotic prime and an infinite prime so easily. And the Ice Goddess Hall must be a god artifact of quite a high grade as well, right? Don't god artifacts have an artifact spirit? Jianshan asked. A cold light flashed through Shui Yunlan's eyes. She said coldly, You're right. The Ice Goddess Hall isn't just the name of an organization. It's also a peak god artifact refined by the Ice Goddess. It's even more powerful than the Azure Poseidon Palace. As long as you're in the Ice Goddess Hall, you can easily kill Nan Patian and Wu Han by using the artifact spirit to control the Divine Hall's power. But in reality, the Ice Goddess Hall has really fallen. What does that mean? It means that there's someone else behind Nan Patian and Wu Han. Chapter 22:14. Jinshan's heart sank slightly as he became extremely stern. Nan Potion's cultivation was already at the peak of chaotic prime, and he could become a Grand Prime at any time. Without even thinking about it, the person supporting him would definitely be a Grand Prime. Moreover, Jianshan guessed that if Nan Patian really did have someone supporting him, that person would definitely not be as simple as a regular Grand Prime. Since there's a Grand Prime eyeing your Ice Goddess Hall, I think it'll be very difficult to deal with unless one of the 7 Grand Exalts, the Ice Goddess, personally takes action. What do you plan on doing now? Jianshan asked. Originally, he had nothing to do with the Ice Goddess Hall. Whether the Ice Goddess Hall lived or died had nothing to do with him. However, since this matter was related to his sister's safety, he could not remain uninvolved no matter what. Shui Yunlan's eyes dimmed. There was some worry in her cold eyes. She sighed gently. Perhaps it's because of the cultivation method we practice in our Ice Goddess Hall, but our personalities are extraordinarily cold. Coupled with the fact that we have the Ice Goddess Hall, one of the 7 Grand Exalts, the Ice Goddess, We possess an extremely great status in both status and identity in the Saints world. As a result, we've never had any contact with the other organizations in the Saints world. Now that our Ice Goddess Hall is in trouble, we can't find any reinforcements. As a result, there's only one path before me, which is for Her Majesty to recover her strength as soon as possible. A gleam of light flashed through Jinshin's eyes when he heard that. He asked with some curiosity, "If my sister recovers her strength, will she be able to change the current predicament the Ice Goddess Hall faces? If Her Majesty recovers her strength, no matter who is supporting Nanpatian, no matter how severe the predicament our Ice Goddess Hall faces, it'll all be resolved," Shui Yunlan said with certainty. Whether it was the Ice Goddess or the Snow Goddess, she felt respect from the bottom of her heart. Jinshin fell silent when he saw how confident Shui Yunlan was. He already knew that his sister was extremely powerful from Shui Yunlan's words, so powerful that she did not fear Grand Primes at all. This made him both happy and worried. He was excited for his second sister to possess such great strength. What worried him was that he didn't know if his second sister would still recognize him when she recovered, or even if she would still be his second sister. After a moment of silence, Jinshin slowly took out several space rings. Jinshin placed almost 10 space rings on the ground. These space rings were his spoils of war, including the Grand Prime's relic he had obtained from the Fifth Prince. This was not all the space rings he had obtained from his trip to the Azure Poseidon Palace. However, he had already tidied up all the space rings. The items inside were all categorized and placed in these space rings. Afterwards, Jinshin began to search through the space rings one by one. He took out many heavenly resources and divine crystals that could increase strength and stored them all in a single space ring. In the end, he picked up the space ring with the Grand Prime's relic and took out the finger-sized crystals that shone with multicolored light. He moved them all into the space ring. 5-colored divine crystals. Shui Yunlan could not help but cry out when she saw the 5-colored divine crystals. Her icy cold eyes were no longer calm, becoming filled with excitement. However, she calmed down very soon. She stared at Jinshin with mixed feelings. She had never thought that there would be a day when she would need Jinshin's help. Jinshin no longer glanced at Protector Shui. He silently moved the items in the space ring and said, "There are over 6,000 5-color divine crystals in this space ring from a Grand Prime. I'll keep 1,000 and give the rest to my sister. There are a total of 5 heavenly resources. I can only be certain that they're the God tier, but I can't tell what grade they are. I'll keep 2 for myself and give the other 3 to my sister. Moreover, there are some pills that can increase cultivation as well as some divine crystals I obtained from killing the other divine kings in the Azure Poseidon Palace. As for the fire divine crystals, I found them at the bottom of the lava. Originally, I planned on exchanging them for 5-color divine crystals once I left the Azure Poseidon Palace, so that I could use teleportation formations between planes. However, since I've obtained quite a few 5-color divine crystals from the Grand Prime's relic, I obviously don't need so many fire divine crystals. A single fire divine crystal can be exchanged for 10 supreme grade divine crystals of the same size. My sister practices an ice-attributed cultivation method, so the fire divine crystals are useless to her. You can exchange them for my sister's cultivation. I found quite a few fire divine crystals at the bottom of the lava. In order for my sister to recover some of her strength as soon as possible, I'll keep 80% for her and 2 for myself," Jinshin said as he tidied up the crystals. Only after he finished tidying up did he pass the space ring to Shui Yunlan. Shui Yunlan was filled with mixed feelings as she looked at the space ring. In the past, she had never thought that an insignificant figure that was even less than an ant in her eyes would be of such great help to her today. After accepting the space ring from Jinshin, she extended the senses of her soul into it subconsciously. When she saw the mountainous pile of cultivation resources, she immediately shuddered. At that moment, even with her mental fortitude, she could not help but tremble in excitement. There were over 5,000 five-color divine crystals, several hundred blocks of supreme-grade divine crystals, 3 high-grade heavenly resources, and over 100 million fire divine crystals. The items in this tiny space ring were enough to make any infinite prime turn green with envy. This was a shocking amount of wealth that could make infinite primes lose their minds. Fantastic, fantastic. With these cultivation resources, Her Majesty's strength may not be able to return to her peak condition, but she'll be able to reach infinite prime successfully. Shui Yunlan was extremely excited and exhilarated. All right, Jianshen, do you have any way to find Mo Tianyun? Mo Tianyun is very powerful. He's a primordial realm expert at the very least. He also has grievances with Nanpatian. If we can work with Mo Tianyun, our strength will increase by quite a lot, Shui Yunlan asked again. Jianshen shook his head. I have no contact with Senior Mo Tianyun. If you want to find him through me, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Jianshen paused before continuing. I'll go find Jianshen and see if he has any ideas regarding the current situation of the Ice Goddess Hall. Jianshen wanted to do everything he could to help his sister since it was related to her safety. Chapter 22:15. It's extremely likely that Ming Dong is... Anyway, Ming Dong's background is very powerful right now. If he can get the experts of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing to help, he should be able to help my sister. Jianshen said in thought. This matter was directly related to his sister's safety. As long as he could help his sister, he would do everything he could, regardless of the method. Ming Dong possesses the law of the Grand Exalt. The other Supreme Divine Kings might not be able to guess his true identity, but Aladona and I already know. If it were anyone else, Ming Dong might be able to use the power of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing to protect Her Majesty with his identity and status. However, my Ice Goddess Hall is unable to do so, said Shui Yunlan. Jianshen was surprised. He asked, Don't tell me you have grievances with each other in the past. Shui Yunlan nodded. A very long time ago, our Ice Goddess Hall did indeed have some conflicts of interest with the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. That matter happened a very long time ago. So long ago that our Ice Goddess Hall did not even have us 4 protectors. As for me, I learned of this from the conversation between the Ice Goddess and the Snow Goddess when I served them. Moreover, I learned from the Snow Goddess that an intense battle erupted between Her Majesty and the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing in the past, when they fought over a unique treasure. In that era, the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing was slightly weaker than the Snow Goddess in terms of cultivation. As a result, the First Majesty was defeated in the end and was suppressed by the Snow Goddess in the glacier. She only broke free 3 years later. Now, the Snow Goddess has yet to awaken her memories, and she has yet to recover her cultivation. It's already extremely fortunate that the people of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing did not kick her when she was down, let alone asking for their help. Then looking at the current situation, the only expert who can help my sister is Senior Mo Tianyun. Jianshen sighed gently. He also felt helpless. He secretly worried for his sister. Although he still had some ties with Tai Ta of the God Clan, Shui Yunlan had fallen out with the greatest divine king of the God Clan, Aladona, when she was still on the Tianyuan continent. It was not very possible for her to find the God Clan. But I also don't know how to find Senior Mo Tianyun. Jianshen voiced out his distress. Shui Yunlan looked at Jianshen with shining eyes. She said, There's no need for you to find him. I think he'll come to you on his own at some point. Your identity will be exposed very soon. Once the people of the Ice Goddess Hall get wind of this, my sister will be in constant danger. Since the only person who can help my second sister now is Senior Mo Tianyun, then we definitely can't just sit around and wait for death. When Senior Mo Tianyun takes the initiative to come to us, we have to do everything we can to see if we can find Mo Tianyun as soon as possible. I'll go ask Rue D and Ji of the Sect of Dragons and Phoenixes and see if they can help us. With that, Jianshen turned around and left. He went to find Rue D and Ji to ask about the Winged Tiger. According to the seniors of our clan, the Winged Tiger god left not long after bringing our clansmen to the Saints' world. After that, He rarely appeared again. That's all we know about the winged tiger. We don't know anything else, said Rue D. The light in Ji Ye's eyes flickered. She looked at Jianshan and said, Rue D, and I don't know much about the winged tiger. If you want to know more, why don't you pay a visit to the sect of dragons and phoenixes? Our seniors know a little more. Afterwards, Jianshan discussed with Rue D and Ji Yi in detail. He obtained the exact location of the sect of dragons and phoenixes. At the same time, he learned from Shangwan Mu why she had come to the Azure Poseidon Palace this time. How long will it take for the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry to awaken? Jianshan looked at Shangwan Mu. The artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry was directly related to Shangwan Mu's future, so he cared about this matter very much. There is indeed a mysterious energy on the 12th floor that can allow the artifact spirit to recover in the shortest amount of time. The zither of the demonic cry has absorbed quite a lot of energy on the 12th floor before, so it has recovered quite a lot. It looks like it'll take another half a month for the artifact spirit to completely awaken, said Shangwan Mu. Her eyes shone with eagerness. A mysterious energy that can allow the artifact spirit to recover, murmured Jianshan. He seemed to be in deep thought. Afterwards, a gleam of excitement flashed through his eyes. Clearly, he had developed a deep interest in mysterious energy. The battle between the Supreme Divine King and the lizard probably hasn't ended yet. Let's rest for a few days first before going up, Jianshan said to Shangwan Mu. Shangwan Mu nodded. She had no objections. Afterwards, Jianshan looked at Ming Dong, Aladona, Shui Yunlan, Rue D, and Ji Yi. He said, Everyone, I promised Xiao Man that I would let her take back the Poseidon Palace that belonged to her ancestor. However, the path ahead will also be filled with obstructions, so I hope I can obtain your assistance. Once it's done, I will definitely thank you greatly. Jianshan, there's no need for you to be so polite between us. Your matters are my matters. If you need my help, just say the word. Ming Dong chuckled and said straightforwardly, I can go with you and benefit a little more. It'll also increase Her Majesty's strength a little more. Shui Yunlan agreed as well. I've come under orders, so I obviously won't let you face any danger. Otherwise, I won't be able to answer to the war god. Aladona smiled faintly. Rue D and Ji Yi looked at each other before Rue D said, Seeing that we're all from the same hometown, Ji Yi and I can help you. However, once it's done, our sect of dragons and phoenixes wants 30% of the infinite primes and chaotic primes legacies you obtained from Xiao Man. Although our sect of dragons and phoenixes has developed rapidly, it's only been around for 1,000,000 years. Compared to many organizations, our heritage is still quite lacking, so we're in desperate need of various cultivation methods and battle skills to recruit guests. As for cultivation resources, we don't want a single one, added Ji Yi. All right, that's no problem. Once Xiao Man controls the Azure Poseidon Palace, I'll give you 30% of all the primordial realm legacies I obtained, Jianshan agreed without any hesitation at all. Jianshan, I'll leave these people to you, Shui Yunlan said at this time. At this moment, Shui Yunlan spoke up. With a wave of her hand, she released the people she had frozen in a divine hall. These people were the divine king who followed the fifth prince, as well as Mr. Shu, who possessed a god artifact. Yun Xin, Yun Lianxing, and the other divine kings of the Yun family happened to be among them as well. However, without exception, all of them were ice sculptures at this moment. Shui Yunlan took action and melted the ice and snow effortlessly, removing their seals. With the seals removed, the people of the Yun family and the divine king who followed the fifth prince all regained their freedom. However, when they saw Shui Yunlan, who radiated with an icy presence and was enveloped by a layer of silver-white armor the entire time, their faces all changed. They became filled with fear. Sir, although our fifth prince did not obtain the complete Grand Prime's legacy, he did obtain a space ring. The space ring must contain unimaginable wealth. So please assist the fifth prince. As long as the fifth prince is alive, all the cultivation resources in the space ring will belong to you, Mr. Shu pleaded. Mr. Shu pleaded. Ever since they had been imprisoned by Shui Yunlan, they obviously had no idea what happened afterwards. Chapter 22:16. Mr. Shu and the others had just been released from the Divine Hall by Shui Yunlan and removed from the seal. So the first person they saw was obviously Shui Yunlan. In their panic, they did not even have time to check their surroundings. So they explained to Shui Yunlan as soon as possible. They had personally witnessed Shui Yunlan's strength on the 12th floor. They were afraid that the fifth prince would escape during the chaos and cause Shui Yunlan to misunderstand, which would lead to their deaths. As a result, they failed to sense Jinshin's presence. Only when Jinshin's voice rang out did Mr. Shu and the others discover in surprise that the Jinshin they hated was actually here as well. "Jinshin, why are you here?" Mr. Shu's face changed slightly. After crying out, his gaze towards Jinshin immediately became piercing. Heavy killing intent radiated from him without any disguise at all. "Jinshin, you've ruined the fifth prince's plans, causing him to miss out on a Grand Prime's legacy. Our Sky Empire will never spare you," Mr. Shu said through gritted teeth. The fifth prince, who should have successfully obtained the Grand Prime's legacy and soared up, had been banished from heaven to hell by Jinshin. This made him hate Jinshin to the core. This was because not only had Jinshin destroyed the fifth prince, but he had also destroyed the Sky Empire's hopes of advancing from an eternal empire to an eternal empire. He had destroyed Mr. Shu's future as well. As a result, Mr. Shu had already begun to treat Jinshin as his greatest enemy. "Brother Jinshin, you're really still alive?" Behind Mr. Shu, Yin Lianqing also stared at Jinshin in surprise. The young lady of the Yin family, Yun Xin, stood beside Yin Lianqing. Her eyes flickered as she stared at Jinshin. Although she did not say anything, she was also filled with uncontainable excitement. Jinshin nodded towards Yin Lianqing and Yun Xin with a smile. He did not make any small talk with them. He looked at Mr. Shu and said indifferently, "Among the people I've offended in Poseidon Palace, there are plenty of peak organizations and clans in the Saints' world. Your Sky Empire is only an eternal empire. Compared to those peak organizations that can shake up the Saints' world, you're only an insignificant figure. Do you think I'm afraid?" Mr. Shu's face sank. When he saw how fearless Jinshin was, he understood that Jinshin really did not take the Sky Empire seriously. Afterwards, he looked at Shui Yunlan with an ugly expression and said, "Fellow, may I ask what your relationship with Jinshin is?" By now, Mr. Shu had gradually calmed down. He glanced around slowly, taking in all the people gathered there. He did not recognize Rue Di and Ji Yi, but when he saw Ming Dong, who sat on the ground and healed, his heart immediately sank. "Jinshin, deal with these people as you see fit," Shui Yunlan said coldly as she used her usual icy tone. With that, she turned around and left. She completely ignored Mr. Shu and the others. The faces of Mr. Shu and the remaining guards instantly turned pale. From what she had said, they already knew that Jinshin had already formed an alliance with the Supreme Divine King, who grasped the power of ice and possessed abnormally terrifying strength. "Fellow, if I've seen correctly, there should be grievances between you and the other fellow. May I ask how many benefits Jinshin has promised you for the two of you to temporarily set aside your personal grievances and work with Jinshin? If you're willing to help us, I believe we can give you what Jinshin can give you," Mr. Shu said to Aladona as the final flames of hope burned in his eyes. Aladona was not as cold as Shui Yunlan. She looked at Mr. Shu and the others sympathetically and said, "Jinshin is a friend of the esteemed war god of our god race. I've only come under the war god's orders to help Jinshin. You've made a mistake from the very beginning by choosing to become enemies with Jinshin." "What? The god race, a friend of the war god?" Mr. Shu was shocked. He stared at Aladona blankly as bitterness filled his heart. Only at this moment did he finally realize just how stupid of a decision it was to become enemies with Jinshin. Now that things have developed to this point, it's useless even if you regret it, Jian Wushuang said coldly. He drew the 9-star sword of heavenly ways and shone with star-like light, swinging it at Mr. Shu and the others mercilessly. In an instant, Mr. Shu and the remaining guards of the Divine King were all slain by Jianshin. Only a few people from the Yun family survived. The people of the Yun family became rather dazed as they stared at the corpses of Mr. Shu and the others. All of them could still clearly remember how Jianshin, Kea, and Chanlong were treated with contempt when they first boarded the spaceship of the Yun family. In particular, when they learned that Jianshin and the others had actually taken up 3 of the spots from the Yun family to enter the Tsang Poseidon Palace, they became displeased. This was because back then, they did not take Jianshin and Kea, who were only over-gods, seriously at all. However, who would have thought that the Jianshin they looked down on back then would stir up such a huge commotion in the Tsang Poseidon Palace? Even the 5th prince and Mr. Shu, who had suffocated them, had died to Jianshin's hands. All the remaining Divine King of the Yun family sighed in amazement when they saw Jianshin wielding the 9-star sword of heavenly ways. Brother Yun Lianqing, the Tsang Poseidon Palace is not peaceful right now. It's best if you leave as soon as possible, said Yun Lianqing to Yun Lianqing. Out of all the Divine King of the Yun family, Jianshin only recognized Yun Lianqing. Yun Lianqing looked at Jianshin with extremely mixed feelings. He said, with the appearance of the Songhai moon, the Tsang Poseidon Palace has become the world of the supreme Divine Kings. In reality, if it weren't for the fact that the 5th prince refused to leave, our Yun family would have left the Tsang Poseidon Palace long ago. Now that the 5th prince is no longer holding us back, we obviously won't stay for long. Brother Jianshin will be leaving first. Farewell. With that, Yun Lianqing left with the other Divine Kings of the Yun family. Yunxin was the last to leave. When she passed by Jianshin, she paused slightly and looked at Jianshin with mixed feelings. She said softly, "Thank you for your assistance. I will never forget your kindness. I just hope you can forgive my mistakes in the past." Yunxin and Yun Lianqing left. They left the Tsang Poseidon Palace together, ending their trip to the Poseidon Palace prematurely. What's your relationship with her? Shangguan Mu stared straight at Jianshin as if she was questioning him. It's nothing complicated. It's just a cooperation between us and the Yun family. Jianshin explained his agreement with the Yun family indifferently. Aladona, I found this in the 5th prince's space ring. It contains a surging presence of life. May I ask if it'll be useful to you? At this moment, Jianshin took out a walnut-sized green bead from his space ring. As soon as the bead appeared, a rich life force filled the air. Just by inhaling it, one would have the illusion that the life force in one's body was growing. Chapter 22:17. A few days later, Jianshin and the others set off again after some rest. They hurried towards the 12th floor. Very soon, they arrived on the 7th floor. At this moment, Jianshin and the others slowed down as well. All of them were vigilant. Even people as powerful as Shui, Yunlan, and Aladona could not relax at all. It's been a few days. I wonder what the final outcome of the battle between the lizard and the supreme Divine King is. Jianshin stopped several 100,000 kilometers away from the entrance of the 8th floor sternly. He stared ahead with a sliver of worry. Afterwards, the senses of his soul expanded rapidly like a sword, enveloping an area of 1,000,000 kilometers in a single instance. Wait for me here. I'll go ahead and take a look, Jianshin said to everyone. With that, he turned into a bolt of lightning, vanishing from their sights with unbelievable speed. He traveled 10,000 kilometers in a single instance. Shui Yunlan, Aladona, Rui Di, Ji, Shangluo Mu Ming Dong, and so on all stopped where they were instinctively. They hovered in the air as they stared in the direction that Jianshin had left in. The senses of their souls pulsed from them, also spreading out in all directions as they observed what was happening up ahead. Clearly, they all knew that Jianshin had lured out a terrifyingly powerful lizard on the 8th floor. Even though they ranked quite high on the Divine King's list, they were not confident about dealing with a high primordial realm lizard at all. As a result, they were all extremely cautious. There are people near the entrance, and there are quite a few of them. Let's go and take a look. Aladona slowly withdrew the senses of her soul and said to the people beside her. Afterwards, The group of people all flew in the direction that Jianshan had left in. Over 20 divine kings sat in the surroundings at the entrance to the 8th floor. All of them were pale and haggard. Their clothes were in tatters. As a matter of fact, some of the supreme divine kings' supreme quality saint artifact armor had even been damaged, revealing a large portion of their skin that had been charred black. Evidently, all of them were seriously injured. Half of them were barely alive, and there were even a few who looked like they were on their last breaths. Their life auras were dim, and there were even some who were missing a leg or a leg. It was also because their injuries were too serious that many of them were unable to continue on their way. They didn't even have the strength to find a place to hide and heal their injuries. They could only scatter around the entrance and take high-grade healing pills to recover from their injuries from a certain distance. All of a sudden, a sword light tore through the sky like a meteor and arrived as fast as lightning. The distance of thousands of miles was covered in an instant. Before the meal was served, it turned into a young man with an extraordinary bearing near the entrance to the 8th floor. The person's arrival alarmed the healing divine kings. When they opened their eyes and saw who it was, all of their faces changed. Flames of fury surged from their eyes, and they clearly hated the person who had come. Jianshan, how dare you come here? Jianshan, you treacherous, despicable bastard. You've killed several hundred supreme divine kings. You'll die a horrible death. You will pay a heavy price for what you've done. There will be no place for you in the saints' world. Half of the healing divine kings bellowed furiously. They all gritted their teeth, as their hatred for Jianshan had already reached the depths of their bones. The other half stared at Jianshan closely. They were filled with caution, ready to flee at any time. Jianshan snorted coldly when he heard the curses. He bellowed, "For the sake of hunting me down, several hundred of you divine kings have gone as far as to run from the 12th floor to the 5th floor of the Poseidon Palace before pursuing me all the way to the 8th floor. Have I, Jianshan, ever offended you? Have I ever offended you? Are you the only ones allowed to hunt me down? Can't I find a way to deal with you? If you hand over the girl without any hesitation, how many of us will go against you?" "You asked for all of this," said a divine king. Even though he was heavily injured, his gaze was still extremely cold. "I asked for all of this? Ha ha. Then can I say that the reason why all of you ended up like this is also because of your own actions? If it wasn't for all of you forcing us, if it wasn't for all of you chasing us mercilessly, how could all of you end up like this?" As he said that, Jianshan slowly approached them. His face was cold, and killing intent gradually surged from his eyes. He said coldly, "If I had lost, I probably would have been reduced to a cold corpse by now. Unfortunately, looking at the current situation, I'm not the one who lost, but you. As a result, you should be the ones reduced to corpses." Jianshan drew the 9-star sword of heavenly ways. The sword shone with faint starlight as it gradually radiated with the might of a god artifact. It shone like the stars. The 20 or so divine kings were clearly unable to put up any resistance after being heavily injured. Jianshan had already made up his mind to kill them. "Jianshan, they're no longer a threat to you. Just let them live. Don't kill them all." At this moment, Aladona's voice rang out from behind. She, Shui Yunlan, and the others hurried over from behind as well. "If we let them go, the news of Her Majesty will definitely be leaked even faster. Kill them all," Shui Yunlan said coldly. Aladona stared at Shui Yunlan furiously and said, "There must be many people who have left Poseidon Palace in the past few days. Nothing that happens in Poseidon Palace can be hidden from the people outside. Your existence has probably already spread outside. Killing them won't make any difference." Aladona paused. She slowly glanced past the 20 or so divine kings and said, "And I'm certain that even if you want to kill them, you can't kill all of them. As long as a single one of them escapes, the deaths of the others will reach their clans. Behind these people stand renowned clans and organizations. They might even be peak organizations in the Saints' world. If the people behind them learn that the supreme prodigies they've spent so much effort nurturing have died to your hands, they definitely won't let you go. They might even hunt you down across the entire Saints' world." Many divine kings have already died to the hands of the lizard on the 8th floor. Their deaths definitely have something to do with me. The organizations behind them will definitely come looking for me. I've already offended so many organizations anyway, so it doesn't matter if I offend a few more, Jinshin said. Chapter 22:18. Since these people want to take part in the contest for the Azure Poseidon Palace, they'll definitely be injured and die. Survival of the fittest and survival of the fittest is a principle that has never changed in this world. If I spare these people today just because their origins are too great and their backgrounds are too great, wouldn't I, Jinshin, have to avoid them as soon as I see them in the Saints world in the future? If these people rely on their background to offend me and target me everywhere, could it be that I have to endure endlessly again and again? Just because these people have great backgrounds, they can hunt me down fearlessly and I can't kill them because I have no background? Jinshin called out coldly. As he looked at Aladona, who stood before him, his face gradually became ugly. Although Aladona was not as powerful as Shui Yunlan, she was far more powerful than him. If she insisted on stopping him, killing these people really would not be easy. Jinshin, I'm doing this for your sake. Even if you don't consider yourself, you have to consider the people behind you. If you really offend the organizations behind them too much, they might find out about your origins and vent their anger on the people behind you. I also know that your brother, Ming Dong, is a member of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. Ming Dong will definitely stand on your side and protect the people behind you so that those organizations won't dare to act recklessly openly. But what about secretly? Aladona tried to persuade him sincerely. She could not just watch Jinshin kill the Divine King who could not fight back anymore. You're too soft-hearted, Shui Yunlan said coldly. Shui Yunlan said coldly from one side. Her heart was as cold as her person, emotionless. She was a completely cold-blooded person. Jinshin sank into his thoughts after hearing Aladona's explanation. The light in his eyes flickered, and he became rather hesitant for a moment. He thought of the Tianyuan family in the distant southern region of the Cloud Plain. Basically, all the people who had come to the Saints' world with him from the Tianyuan continent had been settled down with the Tianyuan family. If the Tianyuan family really suffered because of him, he would probably never be able to forgive himself. All right, I'll spare you this time for the sake of Aladona. After a moment of silence, Jinshin listened to Aladona's suggestion in the end. The heavily injured Divine King all let out a sigh of relief when they heard that. They were all heavily injured in the battle against the lizard. Half of them did not even have the ability to flee. If Jinshin really wanted to kill them, they definitely would not be able to escape death. Although the remaining half still had some strength left to use forbidden techniques to escape, they would have to pay an unbearable price. Unless they had no other choice, they did not want to use this method that was equivalent to harming themselves. As a result, they all felt relieved when they heard that Jinshin was sparing them. At this moment, Jinshin's gaze suddenly sharpened. He glanced past them coldly and called out, "Of course, I'm only sparing you this time. If you become my enemy again in Poseidon Palace, don't blame me for being merciless." With that, Jinshin snorted coldly and directly made his way to the 8th floor. After Jinshin left, the pale-faced and haggard Divine King glanced at the 20 or so Divine King threateningly. He sneered, "You heard what my brother said. If you continue to become my enemy, it won't just be between you and Jinshin. You'll become my enemy as well. I know you all come from large organizations and clans. Every single one of your backgrounds are very great. If I discover that the organization behind you is bold enough to make trouble for my brother, I swear that I will use the power of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing to make the organization behind you pay a heavy price." With that, Ming Dong left with the 5 divine generals behind him. He followed Jinshin to the 8th floor. The expressions of the 20 or so Divine King changed drastically from Ming Dong's threat. All of them feared the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. Even though the Inata Grand Prime who watched over the Heavenly Palace of Bishing had already died, the Heavenly Palace of Bishing was still in existence that stood at the apex of the Saints' world. Let's end this here. I can protect you once, but I can't protect you a second time. Jianshun is a friend of the esteemed war god of our god clan. That's all I have to say. Take care. Aladona looked at the heavily injured divine king with mixed feelings and showed pity. The damaged Unita tower had shrunk to the size of a fist in Jianshun's hand on the volcano on the 8th floor of the Azure Poseidon Palace. He hovered in the air as he looked around cautiously. The senses of his soul flooded the surroundings, scanning the surroundings time and time again. He was prepared to enter the Unita tower at any time. The lizard isn't outside. I wonder how the battle between it and the Divine King is going. Has it returned to the bottom of the lava? Or has it left this floor to continue hunting down the supreme Divine King? Jianshun thought. Several days had already passed now, and the 8th floor had already recovered its peace. Only the heavily damaged group of volcanoes seemed to bear witness to the intense battle that had erupted on this floor earlier. At this moment, Aladona appeared behind Jianshun. She studied the messy world of volcanoes and said, I've heard from those people that the several hundred divine kings trapped on this floor worked together and engaged in a desperate battle against the lizard. In the end, they finally heavily injured the lizard after paying a heavy price of almost 400 divine kings, forcing it back into the lava. The lizard's strength should be around the 8th heavenly layer of infinite prime. 8th heavenly layer of infinite prime? That really is unexpected. I never thought that such a powerful lizard would be heavily injured by a group of divine kings. Jianshun sighed emotionally. However, he also knew that these divine kings were no ordinary divine kings. Instead, they were the supreme divine kings below the divine kings. Every single one of them possessed extremely great battle prowess, and they possessed several dozen god artifacts. Otherwise, let alone several hundred divine kings, even 1,000 divine kings would have been slaughtered by the lizard. Aladona glared at Jianshun in exasperation and said, You're still not satisfied? Do you have to watch the lizard kill all the divine kings before you're satisfied? Aladona sighed gently when she reached there. She became sorrowful and said, We've lost several hundred divine kings all of a sudden, so a small portion of the divine kings' thrones have been emptied out. The outside world is probably in an uproar right now. What happened here will probably alarm many Grand Primes. Once we leave here, there will probably be Grand Primes waiting outside the Tsang Poseidon Palace, Shui Yunlan said in a deep voice. She was extremely stern. She looked at Jianshun and said sternly, It's no longer convenient for me to leave through the main entrance of the Tsang Poseidon Palace now. The only way to leave is to get the girl to gain the recognition of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, and then leave through the teleportation formation in there. Chapter 2219. Jianshun's heart sank as well. He could understand what Shui Yunlan was trying to say. After the Ice Goddess Hall was attacked, Shui Yunlan was afraid that the person who controlled the Ice Goddess Hall would find her and use a secret technique to learn about his sister's whereabouts. As a result, Shui Yunlan had to be careful at all times. She could not expose herself to those peak experts who were basically omnipotent. This was because no one could guarantee that there were no traitors of the Ice Goddess Hall among those peak experts. At the same time, they could not guarantee that there were no peak experts who were also plotting against the Ice Goddess Hall or his sister. Once there were experts like that outside, Shui Yunlan's fate would be obvious if she left the Azure Poseidon Palace through the main entrance. Shui Yunlan was indeed invincible in the Azure Poseidon Palace with her strength. Apart from Aoyama, who ranked first under the Divine King's throne, Shui Yunlan had yet to encounter an opponent who could match her in single combat. Even Zhu, who ranked second under the Divine King's throne, and 2 other Supreme Divine Kings who also ranked in the top 10, were only able to match Shui Yunlan when the 3 of them worked together. However, once they were outside, Shui Yunlan, who was only a Divine King, would still be as insignificant as an ant before Chaotic Primes or even Grand Primes. Are you sure there are teleportation formations in the Azure Poseidon Palace? Jianshun stared at Shui Yunlan with shining eyes as he asked sternly. Shui Yunlan nodded gently. Of course there are. It's just that the teleportation formation is in a sealed region of the Azure Poseidon Palace that's not open to the public. There are only 3 ways to enter that place. The first method is to use supreme strength to break through the obstructions between the two and open up the sealed region to everyone. Shui Yunlan paused when she reached there. She said bitterly, "The Azure Poseidon Palace is a high-quality god artifact. It's unimaginably tough. Even regular Grand Primes don't have the ability to get through that sealed region, let alone us. As a result, we can't do that." The second method is to obtain the permission of the artifact spirit of the Poseidon Palace and have the artifact spirit send us to that place. However, judging from the current situation, the second method also wouldn't work. Thus, there's only one last method left before us, and that is to make the Poseidon Palace recognize a master as soon as possible, and then fight for the permission of the new master of the Poseidon Palace to let the new master of the Poseidon Palace send us away. It seems that I still need to let Xiao Man obtain the recognition of Poseidon Palace as soon as possible. Jianshan murmured. His gaze became determined, and he said, "Let's go. Let's go to the 12th floor first." Jianshan immediately held Shangwan Mu, Er's hand, and directly left the 8th floor with everyone, climbing up. When Jianshan's group arrived on the 8th floor, they discovered over 100 divine king covered in wounds scattered around the tunnel. They sat on the ground and consumed large amounts of pills to recover silently. Jianshan glanced over and discovered that these people were the same as the divine king he had seen on the 7th floor. They were all heavily injured and covered in burns. Some of their flesh had even been incinerated by the terrifying heat of the lava. Even though several days had already passed, there was still a heavy burnt smell in the air. The reason why these people were all scattered and gathered in this area was because they were all in a state of exhaustion. Not only were they extremely weak, but some of them were already on the verge of death. Even moving a little bit was an extremely difficult task. There was no way for them to hurry on their way, so they could only treat their wounds here. Although they had managed to survive the battle against the lizards, they had clearly paid an unimaginable price. Jianshan, at this moment, a furious bellow suddenly rang out. Several hundred meters away, a beggar-like divine king suddenly stood up. His eyes were as sharp as swords as he glared at Jianshan furiously. A powerful sword intent radiated from him. Although he was heavily injured and his face was completely charred, making it impossible to distinguish his original appearance, he still possessed a shocking presence when he stood up. Zhu Wan, Rui D, and Ji, who had come up with Jianshan, both called out when they saw this person. Their gazes were strange and filled with shock. This person was precisely the expert ranked second among the divine kings. Zhu Wan. Not only was Zhu Wan in a sorry state right now, he was covered in severe burns. Moreover, there were many vicious wounds on his body. Some parts of his body had even lost large chunks of flesh. Zhu Wan's long, flowing hair had vanished, replaced by a black, bald head. He had lost his left arm as well, leaving only his right arm. His appearance could be said to be incomparably miserable. The 100 or so divine kings who were still healing in the surroundings all opened their eyes. They all stared silently at Jianshan with sharp, sinister, and hateful gazes. Clearly, these divine kings hated Jianshan to the core after what had happened on the 8th floor. "Let's go. We'll go directly to the 12th floor." Jianshan glanced past Zhu Wan indifferently and did not stay for long. He passed through the crowd with the people behind him and continued upwards. He could already tell that basically all the divine kings had lost their ability to fight. They posed no threat to him. Since he had already decided not to kill them, there was no need for him to waste any more time here. No one dared to stop Jianshan's group as they passed by calmly. Shui Yunlan and Aladona's strength had already left a deep impression on many people in Jianshan's group. Coupled with Rui D and Ji, 2 experts who ranked in the top 10 of the divine kings, as well as the 5 divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing, there was no one who could pose a threat to them with such a powerful lineup right now. As a matter of fact, when Jianshan walked past a few people, all of them became nervous and uneasy, as if they were afraid that Jianshan's group would suddenly attack them. After all, they were no longer in their peak condition. In their weakened state, where they had basically lost all their battle prowess, Even an overgod might be able to kill them. At this moment, the ground began to tremble violently, as though it had suffered an extremely frightening and violent impact. It rose and fell violently in an extremely exaggerated and shocking manner. The source energy of the entire space had also become unusually chaotic at this moment. Even the bright moon hanging high in the sky had completely lost its luster at this moment. Without the Neptunian moon, the only source of light, the entire Neptunian Poseidon palace descended into darkness. It was so dark that they could not even see their own hands. The sudden occurrence caused Jinshin's group to come to a halt. Their faces were all filled with surprise as they looked around in confusion and doubt. What's going on? What's happening? No, this is impossible. The 5 elements in this space are unstable, and yin and yang are out of balance. Even the laws of the world have become chaotic. Heavens, I think the sky is collapsing. The Neptunian moon has vanished. What's going on? It's become much more difficult to condense the power of laws. The cries of the supreme divine kings constantly rang out in the surroundings. The sudden occurrence caused all of their faces to change drastically. They studied the surroundings uneasily. Even without the moonlight from the Neptunian moon, the darkness there was unable to affect them at all. All the people gathered there did not need to use the senses of their souls. They could see very far away through the darkness with their eyes alone. Chapter 22:20. Although I don't know what's happening, it's definitely nothing good. Look at the sky, said Shui Yunlan coldly. Shui Yunlan's icy cold voice rang out. Currently, she had her head raised, staring at the dark sky above her without blinking. Her emotionless eyes were filled with sternness, which was extremely rare for her to do. Jinshin and the others all raised their heads when they heard that. With that glance, all of their eyes narrowed. Even though the sky was pitch black, without any light at all, they could see through the darkness with their divine king realm cultivation and make out the emptiness. At this moment, they could clearly see the sky above the Poseidon palace shatter, vanishing at a visible rate. It's the artifact spirit. It's the artifact spirit of the Poseidon palace. The sudden change in the Poseidon palace must be caused by the artifact spirit. A supreme divine king who was healing nearby cried out. He looked at the sky with mixed feelings. There was eagerness, excitement, and uneasiness. Yes, it must be related to the artifact spirit. Does this mean that the artifact spirit is about to emerge? Another supreme divine king cried out in surprise. When they heard that, all the supreme divine kings who were silently healing struggled to remain calm. Their gazes all changed, searching the surroundings with burning desire, eagerness, and hope. Many of them had the same thought. Did the appearance of the Poseidon Palace's artifact spirit mean that the master recognition process for the Poseidon Palace was about to begin? This caused many of them to be filled with nervousness. Something's wrong. Jinshin growled. His eyes shone like lightning, shining with scorching light. Strands of sword chi gathered around him as he stared at the sky with great focus. However, his heart grew heavier and heavier. At this moment, the change in the sky actually gave him the faint illusion that the sky of the Poseidon Palace was being devoured by a mysterious and powerful force. It was also because of this that the sky shattered and the void collapsed. This was because the heavens of Poseidon Palace were changing. Similarly, on the 9th floor of Poseidon Palace, in the Neptunian mountains that were several million kilometers away from Jinshin's group, an old man in plain clothes stood on the tallest mountain peak. He was also looking up at the pitch-black sky with a solemn expression. This old man was none other than Master Chanlong. At this moment, a small formation flag flew out of Master Chanlong's space ring on its own. A powerful pulse of energy spread out, turning into a huge python in an instant. It stared at the sky with a pair of illusory eyes that were much larger than a human head, while its thick tail swept around uneasily. What's happening? Why do I suddenly feel very agitated? I can't calm down at all. A mental pulse rang out from the huge python. In truth, this python was formed by the formation flags, and inside the formation flags was an origin soul. It seemed to be trapped inside the formation flags. Master Chanlong glanced at the soul in surprise when he heard that. He said, "You actually feel that too? In other words, I'm the same as you. Ever since the change in the sky, I've become extremely agitated as well. It's like thousands of ants are crawling around. I can't calm down no matter what." Old man Chanlong, I suddenly feel like killing someone, the soul in the soul said unhappily. The trapped soul suddenly became rather irritable. The huge python began to revolve around the coiling dragon in an extremely restless manner. "Aren't you skilled in the great divination technique? You have the ability to see through the heavenly secrets and see the past, present, and future. Look into what's happening." Master Chanlong sucked in a deep breath and forced himself to remain composed. In reality, his breathing became more and more hurried, and his heart beat faster and faster. The strange agitation within him became more and more intense as well. "I can't see through it. I can't see through it at all. I can't divine anything." Right at this moment, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the originally pitch-black sky. A sun had actually silently appeared high up in the sky. It was the blue sea Sunday. However, at that moment, the blue sea sun no longer had its former brilliance. Not only was the light it emitted incomparably dim, it was as hazy as a firefly's. Furthermore, when it hung in the sky, it was on the verge of falling. "Hey, run away from here. Poseidon Palace is about to fall. I can't last much longer. Hey, run." With the appearance of the dim sun of the oceans, a weak voice rang out. The voice was vague, but it rang through the entire palace of Poseidon Palace. At that moment, the voice rang out in every corner of every floor of the palace of Poseidon Palace, allowing everyone to hear it clearly. When the vague voice faded away, the dim sun of the oceans that had suddenly appeared in the sky vanished once again, swallowed by the darkness. All the divine king gathered at the entrance to the 9th floor were stunned. However, this shock only lasted for a very short while before it was drowned out by heavy panic and fear. Even the expressions of Jianshun and the others drastically changed at that moment. They suddenly realized that they were in trouble. Did that voice come from the artifact spirit of the palace of Poseidon Palace? Even we can't sense the source of the voice, and it appeared together with the strange sun of the oceans. That voice must have come from the artifact spirit of the palace of Poseidon Palace. Oh no, something has happened to the palace of Poseidon Palace. Everyone run. The palace of Poseidon Palace is about to fall. Even the almost godlike artifact spirit here is about to fall. We can't stay here for long. Run, run. The expressions of all the peerless divine king gathered here changed greatly. After confirming that the voice came from the artifact spirit of the palace of Poseidon Palace, all of their hearts were filled with panic. Let's go. Leave here as quickly as we can. Jinshin's heart sank as well. He suddenly called out to the people beside him. However, just when Jinshin said that, he suddenly became shocked. He staggered and lost his footing, directly falling to the ground. Thump! Thump! At almost the same time, the sounds of people collapsing rang out in the surroundings. Aside from Jianshun, even Aladona, Shui Yunlan, Rui Di, Ji, Shengwanmu Ming Dong, and the 5 divine generals collapsed on the ground as if they had lost all their strength. Even the healing divine king in the surroundings were like deflated balloons. They either sat there limply or lay on the ground powerlessly. None of them could remain standing. Jinshin's complexion became extremely horrible. Not only did he feel like he had lost all his strength in a single moment, but he could not even move a finger. He could not even use the chaotic force within him at all. Chapter 22-21. I can't use origin energy. What's happening here? Oh no, a mysterious power has invaded my body. Not only have I become powerless, unable to use origin energy, but I can't even use the senses of my soul. The Divine King level laws I've comprehended have left me as well. Has the artifact spirit of the song, Poseidon Palace, met with a mishap? Has the song Poseidon Palace changed owners? How is this possible? At that moment, the expressions of all the Supreme Divine King changed. They all cried out as they struggled to remain calm. Their hearts were filled with fear and deep panic. All of them faced the same situation. In that moment, the glorious divine king had been reduced to an ordinary person. Jinshin's heart became extremely heavy as well. His face was ugly. He could already sense the existence of a mysterious power within his body. Even though it was just a tiny, insignificant strand, it was extremely powerful. Not only did it suppress the power of his soul, but it even suppressed his chaotic force. In addition, even the loss of his physical strength was caused by this energy that had invaded his body. What is this power? It's actually so terrifying. Jinshin was shocked. He had become extremely frail right now. Not only was he unable to stand up, but he could not even use the Inata Tower either. Suddenly, Jinshin's eyes narrowed. He stared ahead in shock. His gaze pierced through the darkness, and he could clearly see an extremely terrifying power. It had turned into a visible, thick mist, surging towards everyone. It blotted out the sky and swallowed everything in its path. Oh no, run. Let's leave this place quickly. That song, Poseidon Palace, has changed owners. The person who secretly took that song, Poseidon Palace, is not a kind person. He wants to kill all of us. The supreme divine king gathered their cried out as they used all their strength to climb towards the 8th floor. Many of them were flustered. It was because all of them felt a dense, killing intent from the surging fog in front of them. It was a terrifying, killing intent that caused all of them to feel chills all over their bodies. Even people as powerful as Zhu Wan, Shui Yunlan, and Adriana shivered. They felt like they would not be able to escape from a calamity. However, these people had already lost all the strength in their bodies. Even if they used all their strength to crawl toward the 8th floor, their speed was as slow as a snail's. As for the fog formed from the terrifying energy that was filled with fierce killing intent, its speed grew faster and faster. With their speed, it was simply impossible for them to enter the 8th floor before the fog enveloped them. Jinshin stared fixedly at the mist that seemed to be filled with thousands of demons. He was extremely worried as well as he racked his brains for a solution. Unfortunately, he was just like the other supreme divine king right now. He had been reduced to a mortal. He could not use his profound sword chi, and he could not even open his space ring. He could not take out the cosmic movement talisman in there either. However, just as Jinshin was feeling helpless, he suddenly became stunned. One of his eyes suddenly began to glow with a faint violet light, while the other became a faint azure light. The sword spirits that had been hiding in his body suddenly emerged at this moment. Before so many divine king, the sword spirits were unable to directly manifest themselves due to their concerns. They could only use Jinshin's eyes to observe the situation outside. It really is the power of samsara. The sword spirits seemed to have finally confirmed their guesses as they stared at the terrifying energy that surged over. They all cried out. They were extremely shocked. Oh no, master. The power of samsara is extremely terrifying. Don't come in contact with it at all. With master's current cultivation, he can't resist the power of samsara at all. Even if he comes in contact with it, he'll be doomed, Ching Suo said in a panic. The power of samsara from the samsaric immortal exalt? Jinshin bitterly smiled. The sword spirit's warning came too late. It was also at this moment that the power of samsara that surged over in the form of mist swept over like a storm, enveloping Jinshin and all the supreme god kings. Immediately, Jinshin felt his vital energies rapidly drain away. The tremendous life force that filled his body rapidly withered away. His soul dimmed as he became more and more powerless. In a daze, he seemed to see 6 huge discs of samsara hanging high above his head, as if they wanted to pull him in. The power of samsara was just too terrifying. Jinshin truly could not resist at all before it. Even Shui Yunlan and the others faced the same situation as Jinshin. Before the power of samsara, none of them could resist at all. Their life force withered away as their souls dimmed. At this moment, the 9th floor was not the only place where the power of samsara had appeared. The entire 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace had been enveloped by the power of samsara. The world of volcanoes on the 8th floor of the song, Poseidon Palace, had also been filled by the power of samsara. The fire-red lava below them had already turned pitch black at a visible rate. The power of samsara seemed to be able to permeate any place. Whether it was the connected volcanoes or the boiling lava, they were unable to stop its advance. Roar! Suddenly, a furious roar rang out. A huge lava lizard leaped out of the lava, its body covered in terrifying wounds. Its huge eyes were filled with an indescribable fear, and it wanted to escape from this place. However, the light in its eyes quickly dimmed, as if it had lost all its strength in an instant. Its huge body that had just leaped into the air crashed into the lava with a loud bang, slowly sinking into the lava. Even the 12th floor of the song, Poseidon Palace, was not spared. The 4 Grand Prime statues were also enveloped by the power of samsara. One of them had already collapsed, and only the other 3 shone with a hazy light as they persisted stubbornly. At this moment, the only thing that remained unaffected in the entire song, Poseidon Palace, was the Neptunian Mountains on the 9th floor. However, the Grand Exalt formation in the Neptunian Mountains began to operate at full strength as well. It formed a huge barrier of energy that enveloped the entire mountain range, stopping the power of samsara from invading. Master Chanlong stood on the highest peak in the Neptunian Mountains. He looked at the devastating power of samsara outside as he became extremely stern. Beside him, the giant python also coiled around him. Its illusory snake eyes also emitted a solemn light as it stared at the world outside without blinking. Gu Dao! Right at this moment, an indistinct voice sounded out slowly from the heavens and the earth. The voice was aged and carried a sense of age, as if it had already experienced an extremely long period of time, and it carried an aura of indifference as it reverberated through the entire Neptunian Mountains. The eyes of Chanlong and the huge python both narrowed as they looked in the same direction. Right before them, outside the song Poseidon Palace, a blurry figure hovered in the sky. The power of samsara around him surged like a cloud beneath his feet. With a single glance, the blurry figure seemed to be the ruler of the world. Even the powerful power of samsara was trampled beneath his feet. "Who are you?" Master Chanlong called out sternly. As soon as he saw the blurry figure, all his hairs stood on end as chills ran down his spine. The scales of the python beside him stood on end as its eyes narrowed to the size of a formation's core. "Old man, the samsara of the 6 paths," said the blurry figure. His ancient voice contained the endless power of ways, causing the 3,000 laws to be disturbed and thrown into disorder. P.S. Originally, I planned to make up for it today, but I really am not in a good state today. I'm very exhausted, and my fingers often won't listen to me when I write. Without any other choice, I can only start tomorrow. In short, this month was a month for him to make up for it. Xiao Yao planned to make up for it in the remaining 20 days of the month. Chapter 22:22. The Samsaric? Master Chanlong murmured softly. He was confused. He found the name to be rather familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. However, in the next moment, Master Chanlong shuddered violently. He stared at the blurry figure outside the Neptunian Mountains and cried out in shock. "Why? Are you the Samsaric immortal exalt who destroyed the Taoist sect of Neptunian single-handedly?" Master Chanlong's heart churned after learning the identity of the person who had come. He became extremely shocked and filled with deep disbelief. The legends of the Samsaric immortal exalt had reached his ears like thunder after he entered the Neptunian Poseidon Palace. However, every single rumor about the Samsaric immortal exalt was extremely shocking, enough to shock any divine king who heard it for the first time. The Taoist sect of Neptunian was a peak organization that shook up the saint world in the past. Not only did they possess 1,000,000 disciples, but they also had 4 Grand Primes. One of their Grand Primes was so powerful that he had reached the apex of cultivation. He was known as one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalts in the past, a terrifying existence only second to Grand Exalts. It was possible to imagine just how glorious and glorious the Taoist sect of Neptunian was in the past with such a supreme ancestor. However, the Taoist sect of Neptunian, which was a colossal existence in the eyes of many people in the saints' world, had been destroyed by the samsaric immortal exalt alone. The four grand primes of the Taoist sect of Neptunian, including the one only second to grand exalt, had all died in the Neptunian Poseidon Palace. None of them survived. If it were not for the grand exalt of ancient paths, one of the seven grand exalts of the saints' world, the Taoist sect of Neptunian probably would not even have been able to preserve the Neptunian Poseidon Palace. The samsaric immortal exalt would have shattered it. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how powerful the samsaric immortal exalt was. At this very moment, the samsara immortal venerable, who was a legendary figure in Master Chanlong's heart, had actually appeared in front of him. The impact on his heart was extremely strong. The trapped soul beside Chanlong widened its illusionary eyes as well. It also stared ahead in shock at the blurry figure who claimed to be the samsaric emperor. It was extremely shocked. Although they couldn't see the true face of the blurry figure, they felt a terrifying pressure that could topple mountains and overturn seas when facing this figure. That figure did not speak. He merely hovered in the sky, while terrifying reincarnation power churned violently around his body. It condensed into a cloud beneath his feet. At a glance, it was as though he was riding on a cloud. He did not admit to his identity, nor did he deny it. He only paused silently outside the boundary of the Neptunian mountains as if he was looking in Chanlong's direction. A while later, his figure turned into a wisp of reincarnation power and vanished like a wisp of smoke. He did not set foot in the boundary of the Neptunian mountains. Several million kilometers away, Jianshan and over 100 heavily injured divine king collapsed on the ground powerlessly. Under the envelopment of the reincarnation power, all of their vital energies rapidly flowed away. After losing a great amount of energy, it caused all of them to become weaker and weaker. Our vital energies are about to run out, but this mysterious power shows no signs of stopping at draining us of our vital energies. Are we going to die here today? Rue D said bitterly. He did not fear death, but he found it extremely difficult to accept dying here for no apparent reason. It's said that there has always been a rumor in the Songhai Poseidon Palace that when the Neptunian moon appears, the Songhai Poseidon Palace will undergo great changes. Before, many people thought that this was because the artifact's spirit had awakened and that the Songhai Poseidon Palace was about to choose a new master. But looking at it now, this is probably the true change, Shui Yunlan said with a sigh. Shui Yunlan sighed. Even with her strength, she was powerless to struggle before the terrifying power of samsara. It doesn't matter if I die here, but what about Her Majesty? Her Majesty is still very weak right now. It'll be very difficult for her to survive in the saints' world alone. Shui Yunlan suddenly thought of Her Majesty, the snow goddess, who was still waiting for her to find cultivation resources. She immediately became worried. At this moment, a long whistle suddenly rang out from beside Shui Yunlan. Jianshan, who had originally collapsed on the ground, suddenly began to shine with a faint red light. The moment the red light appeared, a desolate presence that seemed to originate from ancient times immediately surged over. Along with it was a terrifying presence that completely exceeded Jianshan's own strength, enough to strike fear into the hearts of many divine kings. Under the pressure of the reincarnation power, Jianshan used the power of the ancient skywolf's bloodline within him, forming a paper-thin red barrier around him. After using the power of the ancient skywolf's bloodline, the reincarnation power that permeated the Songhai Poseidon Palace seemed to be temporarily cut off. As the power of the ancient skywolf's bloodline rapidly flowed away, Jianshan gradually recovered some strength. He stood up from the ground with great difficulty. His actions immediately stunned everyone present. Everyone's gazes gathered on him as shock filled their faces. Ignoring the gazes in the surroundings, Jianshan slowly closed his eyes and focused. He began to gather the power of his soul as much as he could. He wanted to take out the Eneta Tower in a single stroke and take everyone around him into it before leaving through the cosmic movement talisman. However, whether it was taking out the Eneta Tower or taking out the cosmic movement talisman from his space ring, he needed to use the power of his soul. If it were any other time, it would have been effortless for him to do this. However, under the envelopment of the reincarnation power, he could only use the power of the ancient Skywolf's bloodline to form a thin barrier. Only then could he use a sliver of the power of his soul to do this. Faster, faster. Jianshan panicked as he gathered the power of his soul. The power of the ancient Skywolf's bloodline was being depleted far too quickly. He could not last much longer. There's actually the presence of the ancient Skywolf's bloodline. At this moment, an ancient voice rang out from outer space, reverberating through the surroundings. When the voice rang out, the reincarnation force that permeated the surroundings began to surge violently. An illusionary figure that seemed to have fused with the reincarnation force silently appeared near Jianshan. As soon as this person appeared, he seemed to dominate the entire region, causing the laws in the surroundings to undergo a mysterious change. The barrier around Jianshan from the power of the ancient Skywolf's bloodline seemed to be suppressed by the laws of the world, shattering in an instant. Samsaric Immortal Exalt, please show mercy. At this moment, two streaks of light, one azure and one violet, suddenly appeared above Jianshan's head. The sword spirits appeared, turning into a young man and woman in their 20s. They stared at the blurry figure excitedly. Chapter 22-23. It's a long story. Samsaric Immortal Exalt, please show mercy and do not harm our master, Ziying pleaded. Her voice was filled with respect. The Samsaric Immortal Exalt took a step forward and arrived before Jianshan step by step. At the same time, his illusionary body that seemed to be condensed from the power of Samsara gradually gained flesh and blood. It shone with a powerful light of life, surging like a vast ocean. When the Samsaric Immortal Exalt stood before Jianshan, he had already become an old man with flesh and blood. His silver hair reached his waist, and his ruddy complexion was ruddy. His old eyes were as deep as the starry sky, and 6 blurry samsara wheels seemed to revolve in his eyes. They possessed profound truths of the heavens, as if he had comprehended the mysteries of the universe and grasped the supreme laws. As the Samsaric Immortal Exalt studied Jianshan, Jianshan's eyes were also wide open. He stared at the Samsaric Immortal Exalt curiously. He felt endless curiosity and admiration towards the Samsaric Immortal Exalt, one of the 5 grand exalts of the Immortals world. This was because the Samsaric Immortal Exalt had single-handedly destroyed the Taoist sect of Neptunia. His strength was unquestionable. He was a true sovereign of the world, a supreme existence. The first impression that the Samsaric Immortal Exalt gave Jianshan was that he was surrounded by an aura of immortals. He seemed like he was riding the clouds. Even when he stood there very casually, he seemed to have fused with the world and become a part of the laws of the world. However, when Jianshan met the Samsaric Immortal Exalt's eyes, he immediately felt dizzy and his soul faltered. He felt like his soul was about to leave his body and be sucked away by the Samsaric wheels that had vaguely appeared in the Samsaric Immortal Exalt's eyes. Jianshan closed his eyes as soon as he could in shock. He stopped looking at the Samsaric Immortal Exalt's eyes and silently stabilized his soul. I never thought that I would be able to meet that old man's successor in a foreign land. Sigh, it's just a pity that you cultivate the chaotic body, so your future is destined to be extremely limited. You probably won't be able to shoulder such heavy responsibilities. The Samsaric Immortal Exalt stared at Jianshan and gently sighed. He seemed to be extremely disappointed by Jianshan's chaotic body. Jianshan could naturally tell that the Samsaric Immortal Exalt was greatly disappointed in him, the successor of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. This was because there were plenty of people who cultivated the chaotic body in the Immortals world. However, throughout history, no one who cultivated the chaotic body had ever reached Immortal Exalt. As time went on, the concept that Immortal Emperor was the limit formed. Even though the primal chaos energy was very powerful and was known to be invincible among those of the same level, it could challenge those of a higher level. However, immortal emperors were limited by their cultivation. No matter how heaven-defying and shocking their battle prowess was, they were still immortal emperors in the end. They were still as insignificant as ants before the supreme grand exalts who were like the laws of the world. They could not fight back at all. As a result, in the eyes of the samsaric immortal exalt, Jinshin's future was already decided. He believed that it was impossible for Jinshin to reach the same level as the old master of the sword spirits. Samsaric immortal exalt, don't underestimate our master. Our master is not as simple as you imagine him to be. We believe that our master will break the legend that those with the chaotic body cannot become immortal exalts, the sword spirits said confidently. They were condensed from yin and yang qi, so they possessed some natural advantages and abilities. From time to time, they could see some secrets of the world that even grand exalts could not see through, so they knew that Jinshin was extraordinary. Senior's 6 paths of reincarnation. Some of these people are my friends. Please forgive them this once. Please forgive me. Jinshin was no longer injured by the samsaric immortal exalt. He stood up from the ground with great difficulty and bowed to the samsaric immortal exalt politely. Aside from Jinshin, all the divine kings gathered nearby had fallen unconscious with the appearance of the samsaric immortal exalt. Jinshin was the only one who remained conscious. Don't worry, none of them will die. The power of the old man's soul has been hidden in Poseidon Palace for so many years. It's not for dealing with these kids, said the samsaric immortal exalt. The samsaric immortal exalt said, no matter how talented these supreme god kings were, they were not enough to catch his attention. Senior samsaric immortal exalt, may I ask how the artifact spirit of Poseidon Palace is right now? Jinshin asked. He had many questions that he wanted to ask. Whether it was related to Poseidon Palace or the immortal's world, he hoped that the samsaric immortal exalt would be able to understand them. In particular, the artifact spirit of Poseidon Palace was something that Jinshin cared about the most right now. The artifact spirit of the palace has only been temporarily suppressed by the old man. The old man's original body is far away in the immortal's world, so killing it with just the power of his soul is not something that can be done in a short amount of time, said the samsaric immortal exalt. Jinshin was shocked when he heard that. The samsaric immortal exalt was able to suppress the artifact spirit of Poseidon Palace with just the power of his soul. The samsaric immortal exalt could use the power of the divine hall as he wished. If his original body had come, just how terrifying would it be? He could probably shatter the Neptunian divine palace with a wave of his hand and kill the artifact spirit with a wave of his hand. Samsaric immortal exalt, may I ask how the sword sect of Purple Heavens is doing right now? Does it still exist in the immortal's world? The sword spirits also asked. They were nervous, as if they were afraid of hearing something that they could not accept. Although they were only sword spirits, the twin swords were the treasures of the sword sect of Purple Heavens after all. The sword spirits had a special attachment to the sword sect of Purple Heavens. The samsaric immortal exalt fell silent when the sword spirits mentioned the sword sect of Purple Heavens. However, his reaction made the hearts of the sword spirits sink. Sorrow filled their faces as they asked with trembling voices, does the sword sect of Purple Heavens no longer exist? Jinshin shivered inside when he heard that. Although he had no attachment to the sword sect of Purple Heavens, where he had not even seen it before, he was still the successor of the sword sect of Purple Heavens after all. If the sword sect of Purple Heavens really was destroyed, he would not feel good either. Sigh. The samsaric immortal exalt gently sighed and shook his head. The sword sect of Purple Heavens still exists, but the situation might not be too optimistic. The samsaric immortal exalt paused there. He looked at Jinshin and said sternly, if your identity in the saint's world hasn't been exposed, it's best if you stay in the saint's world for a while. Recklessly returning to the immortal's world before you've become powerful might not be a good thing for you. Senior samsaric, Enough, we can talk about that later. Old Man has something even more important to do. It's related to the future of the Immortals world. The samsaric Immortal Exalt stopped Jianshun with a wave of his hand. He was unwilling to say anything more. Afterwards, he looked at the unconscious supreme divine kings in the surroundings and suddenly made a grabbing motion. With that, the surrounding space suddenly shrank, affected as well. Jianshun saw threads of various sizes being pulled out from the divine kings in disbelief. They were all grabbed by the samsaric Immortal Exalt. These are threads of karma? Jianshun's face immediately changed when he recognized the threads of energy. He immediately stood before Shangwan Mu, and pointed at Ming Dong, Shui Yunlan, Aladona, Rui Di, and Ji Yi. He said, "Senior, these people are my friends. Please spare them." Although he knew that the samsaric Immortal Exalt would not take their lives, Jianshun experienced an ill omen when he saw their threads of karma being pulled out. The samsaric Immortal Exalt turned around and stared at Jianshun deeply. His face sank slightly, and he said, "They're from the Saint's world." Chapter 22-24. The samsaric Immortal Exalt looked at Jianshun silently. His gaze, which was as profound as the starry sky, gradually sharpened. In the eyes of the samsaric Immortal Exalt, it was basically impossible for Jianshun to reach the peak due to his cultivation of chaotic force. It was impossible for him to become someone who could attract the attention of a grand exalt like him. However, Jianshun was the successor of the Sword Sect of Violet Heavens after all. No matter how great his achievements were in the future, no matter how far he could go, he would still be a person of the Immortals world. The Immortals world stood against the Saints world, yet he was actually so close to the people of the Saints world under such tense circumstances. This made the samsaric Immortal Exalt extremely displeased. Whatever. A while later, the samsaric Immortal Exalt sighed gently. The sharpness in his eyes gradually vanished, and they became profound again. He said, "Seeing how you're the only successor of that old man, I'll let you off." As he said that, the samsaric Immortal Exalt loosened his grip slightly. The threads of karma that belonged to Shangwan Mu, Ming Dong, Shui Yunlan, Aladona, Rui Di, and Ji immediately left his hand and returned to their bodies. Among the children you want to protect, 3 of them have quite the background. They're closely connected to grand exalts of the Saints world. If the old man wants to do something to their karma, they'll definitely sense it. As a result, even if you don't say anything, the old man won't touch the 3 of them recklessly, said the samsaric Immortal Exalt. The samsaric Immortal Exalt said, everyone had different backgrounds and came in contact with different people, so the threads of karma they formed were different as well. He had only just discovered that Adriana, Shui Yunlan, and Ming Dong were actually connected to grand exalts of the Saints world through the threads of karma. As a result, he did not dare to touch them recklessly. Jianshun immediately let out a sigh of relief when he heard that the samsaric Immortal Exalt was no longer doing anything to Shangwan Mu and the others. He looked at the thread of karma in the samsaric Immortal Exalt's hand, and doubt gradually filled his eyes. He could clearly see that in the hands of the samsaric Immortal Venerable, there were already over 1,000 karmic threads of different sizes gathered. Among them, over 100 came from the Divine King nearby. The remaining 1,000 karmic threads seemed to have crossed through space and time, extending from an unknown place. Among them was a fiery red karmic thread that was noticeably larger than the rest. It attracted Jianshun's attention. From this karmic thread, Jianshun seemed to sense the aura of the lava lizard. This allowed him to instantly confirm that the karma thread came from the giant lava lizard. At this moment, Jianshun's eyes suddenly narrowed. To his surprise, he discovered that the thread of karma from the lava lizard had suddenly scattered into many extremely thin threads. The other end of each thread was connected to the Divine King, and one of them was actually connected to Jianshun. Jianshun's eyes narrowed. He looked around and discovered that the only people who did not have any threads of karma with the lava lizard were Shangwan Mu, Ming Dong, Shui Yunlan, Aladona, Rui Di, and Ji Yi. In reality, None of them had come into contact with the lava lizard at all. Karma, karma. Jianshan sank into his thoughts with this discovery. Vaguely, he seemed to comprehend something. He gained a rough understanding of the way of karma. "I never thought you would actually be able to see threads of karma," said the samsaric immortal venerable. The samsaric immortal exalt's voice rang out. He looked at Jianshan in surprise and said, "You can see the threads of karma, which means you can grasp the way of karma." The samsaric immortal exalt withdrew his gaze. He looked at the threads of karma that he controlled and said after some thought, "Everything in the world has karma, from a newborn baby to a grand exalt who stands at the apex of the world. There are no exceptions. In this universe, no one can escape karma. When people come into contact with each other, karma will be planted, forming threads of karma, indicating that you're connected to them. When immortals come into contact with each other, be it through kindness or enmity, karma will also form, forming threads of karma. For example, the red thread of karma you see right now. It comes from the innate spirit formed from endless fire elemental energy on the 8th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. You people have come into contact with the innate spirit and have fought with it before, so a thread of karma has formed between you and the innate spirit. However, the people you want to protect clearly haven't come into contact with the innate spirit at all. They haven't even met, so their relationship with the innate spirit is pure. So naturally, there are no threads of karma," the samsaric immortal venerable said slowly. He explained many of the mysteries of the way of karma, allowing Jianshan to gain a more direct understanding of the way of karma. "Senior samsaric, are you trying to find the people behind the supreme divine king through their threads of karma?" Jianshan asked. As his understanding of karma gradually deepened, he seemed to understand the samsaric immortal venerable's intentions. The samsaric immortal venerable nodded. "That's right. Since these kids are supreme divine king, their background are naturally quite impressive. Through these threads of karma, Old Man can easily find all the people who have karmic ties with them. If they have deep ties with chaotic primes, or even grand primes, Old Man can even find those grand primes through the threads of karma. With Old Man's mastery of the way of karma and the essence and bloodline of these people, he can leave behind a demonic seed in the hearts of all the people who have karmic ties with them. As long as he doesn't do anything to those grand primes who are too outstanding, no one will be able to find out." Jianshan was shocked. In that case, the samsaric immortal venerable would be able to move against over 100 organizations simultaneously through the supreme divine king, leaving behind demonic seeds in the hearts of thousands of people. Even regular grand primes would not be able to survive. That was just too terrifying. Although he did not know what would happen to the people who were left with demonic seeds, he knew it would not be good without even thinking about it. It's just a pity that many people were slain by the innate spirits on the 8th floor. In the end, only 100 or so people remain. As for the people scattered elsewhere, there aren't many of them who have karmic ties with experts, so they're not very useful, continued the samsaric immortal venerable. He was filled with pity. "Senior samsaric, why are you doing this?" Jianshan asked. "For the immortal's world," the samsaric immortal exalt said sternly. Afterwards, with a thought, the vital essences that had been extracted from the supreme god kings all appeared in the air. There were over 100 of them, and they turned into transparent balls of light of various sizes. They hovered above the supreme god kings as they slowly approached their threads of karma. The samsaric immortal venerable had already begun to move. He attempted to find the people behind the supreme divine king through the karmic ties and plant a demonic seed in the hearts of all the people who had karmic ties with them. "Senior samsaric, you're one of the grand exalts of the immortal's world after all. You're an existence that stands at the apex of the world, yet you're actually moving against a group of juniors. Isn't that a little beneath you?" At this moment, a woman's voice boomed from the heavens and earth. Her voice was extremely pleasant to the ears, as beautiful as the heavens and earth. There was also a sense of aloofness and coldness in her voice. As the woman's voice rang out, the entire Azure Poseidon Palace shook violently. The power of reincarnation that filled every inch of the Azure Poseidon Palace also surged violently. P.S. Recently, Xiaoyao had clearly updated, but I've received many complaints from readers that I haven't updated today. Some readers even complained to me that I haven't updated for many days. When Carefree saw the news, he felt that he had been wronged. Now, Carefree would like to explain to his brothers that the Primal Chaos Sword God had a lot of reading platforms. All the platforms that charge for reading the Primal Chaos Sword God are authentic. However, these platforms are not the first ones. What was a first website? It was a platform that could be seen immediately after the author updated. That was the first website. As for the other platforms, there would often be delays. There were even some platforms that did not synchronize the chapters for several days, or even stopped updating altogether. Hence, in order for everyone to know the latest situation of Chaos Sword God, please listen to Xiaoyao's WeChat public account. Xingxingxiao 110. Chapter 22-25. This sudden voice caused Jinshin's expression to change. He gazed at the churning power of samsara and the violently trembling cerulean Poseidon Palace. His heart suddenly sank as he realized that the situation was bad. Some supreme experts had already made it to the Azure Poseidon Palace. To be able to ignore the supreme defense of a high-quality god artifact and use brute force to break through the layers of obstructions and barge in from the outside, one could imagine just how powerful this person was. I never thought that the experts of the Saints' world would come so quickly. The samsaric immortal exalt became stern as well. He turned around and stared at Jinshin in interest. He growled, "The person who has come is extremely powerful. Old Man's clone is not his opponent at all. The Old Man has already erased the thread of karma between you and the Old Man. You must remember, before your identity is exposed, do not return to the immortal world. Even if you return to the immortal's world in the future, do not reveal the sword spirits of the twin swords before you are powerful enough. The sword spirits of the azulate swords are unique existences in the world. When the two swords fuse, they possess the power to split apart the world. In the past, when that old man wielded the azulate swords, no one in the immortal's world dared to touch them. However, ever since that old bastard died, the sovereigns of the immortal's world no longer had anything to worry about. In all these years, they've never stopped searching for the sword spirits. The samsaric immortal exalt warned sternly. Before Jinshin could reply, he pointed at Jinshin. Immediately, a powerful force of samsara surged into Jinshin's body, causing Jinshin to return to his previous state. He lost all his strength in a single moment, collapsing powerlessly to the ground. Moreover, the pain he suffered this time was countless times more intense than before. Not only did he become extremely weak in an instant, his head was extremely heavy, and he almost fainted. As his consciousness became hazy, Jinshin bit his tongue and did his best to stay awake. Fortunately, the samsaric immortal exalt treated Jinshin completely differently from how he treated the supreme divine kings. Seeing how Jinshin did not want to fall unconscious, he did not force him. Since you're not afraid of being exposed, the old man will give you a fortuitous encounter. Whether you benefit from it will depend on your own fortune, said the samsaric immortal exalt. In the next moment, Jinshin felt the world around him. The samsaric immortal exalt had already extracted a sliver of his soul, fusing with the samsaric immortal exalt. In a daze, Jinshin felt like he had become the samsaric immortal exalt at that moment, and the samsaric immortal exalt was him. He seemed to have fused with the samsaric immortal exalt. Boom! At this moment, a deafening rumble rang out. This time, it was much louder than before, as if it came from within the Poseidon Palace. Has he already entered the Poseidon Palace? That's much faster than the old man expected. The samsaric immortal exalt looked at the sky and became even sterner. Afterwards, his hand rapidly moved through the air, affecting the threads of karma, causing them to change as well. This is the old man's usage of the way of karma. Comprehend it carefully. Whether you can understand it or not will depend on your own comprehension, said the samsaric immortal exalt. Jinshin's soul that had fused with the samsaric immortal exalt immediately began to focus on comprehending the way of karma from the samsaric immortal exalt seriously. The samsaric immortal exalt was a grand exalt who had reached the apex of a world. To be able to receive the personal teachings of a grand exalt was a fortuitous encounter that could change the fate of anyone. He knew how precious this opportunity was, so he treasured it greatly. The samsaric immortal exalt purposefully slowed down, demonstrating to Jinshin as clearly as possible. He was truly passing on his way of karma to Jinshin selflessly. Jinshin clearly saw how the samsaric immortal exalt used the way of karma. At the same time, he saw the threads of karma of the various supreme divine kings change under the samsaric immortal exalt's hands. As they changed, a mysterious power seemed to be planted within the supreme divine kings through their threads of karma. Jinshin had no idea what the mysterious power was, but he understood that it was the demonic seed that the samsaric immortal exalt had mentioned. Originally, the old man wanted to use these people's threads of karma to plant a demonic seed in all the people behind them. But it's too late now, the samsaric immortal exalt said regretfully. As soon as he said that, the pitch-black night sky on the 9th floor of the Poseidon Palace suddenly became extraordinarily bright. It shone like the sun, illuminating the entire world. The samsaric immortal exalt no longer paid any attention to the divine kings lying on the ground. Instead, he stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the sky. Above the sky, a hazy figure bathed in the sunlight slowly descended from the sky. With her arrival, the laws rumbled, the sky roared, and the ground trembled. The laws all pulsed, as if she was a god of the world. Her arrival caused the world to change. Beneath her feet were blurry stairs formed by the power of rules. When she descended from the sky, it was as if she was walking down the stairs of rules step by step. Not only did the resplendent light from her illuminate every inch of the Poseidon Palace like the sun, but it also dispersed the power of samsara from the samsaric immortal exalt bit by bit under the light. As a result, the space that the power of samsara occupied was gradually replaced by the light. This woman really is terrifying. She can probably pierce the sky with a raise of her hand and destroy an entire region of space. Jinshin studied the hazy woman before him as he fused with the samsaric immortal exalt. He was shocked. He knew that the cultivation of the woman in front of him was so strong that it had probably reached an inconceivable level. No wonder even the high-quality god artifact of the Poseidon Palace couldn't stop you for long. You're only a step away from the great perfection of laws. Whether it's the immortal's world or the saint's world, experts who can reach your level of cultivation are extremely rare. Who are you? Which organization do you come from? The samsaric immortal exalt asked calmly. The woman stood at the same height as the samsaric immortal exalt. Light filled the sky around her, blurring her figure. She bowed slightly, greeting the samsaric immortal exalt as a junior. She said coldly, "This junior is Exen. My master is the Enita Grand Exalt. Greetings, Senior Samsaric." Chapter 22-27. Thank you for your praise, Senior Samsaric, Xin said calmly. Afterwards, her resplendent eyes paused on Ming Dong for a while before slowly glancing at the divine king on the ground. She said, "Senior Samsaric, you're one of the renowned sovereigns of the world in the immortals' world. You're a supreme existence revered by all immortals. Aren't you losing your status as a senior by attacking these juniors with your status?" The samsaric immortal exalt could not be bothered to explain himself. He stood in the air as a powerful presence flooded out. He chuckled aloud. "Cut the crap and do it. Let's show old man just how long you'll need to destroy the old man's clone." Exion's gaze immediately became piercing when she heard that. She clasped her fist towards the samsaric immortal exalt and said coldly, "If that's the case, then I'll have to offend you." Just as she finished speaking, the multicolored light that filled the sky around Exen suddenly became incomparably dazzling. Her aura soared into the sky, causing the void to be destroyed, the sky to shatter, and all the stars in the sky to dim. The entire ninth layer seemed to have entered an era of great destruction, giving people the illusion that it was about to be destroyed. Of course, this was only because EXIN's presence was just too terrifying. It was just an illusion of grandeur on the ninth floor of the Tsang, Poseidon Palace. The Tsang, Poseidon Palace, was a high-quality god artifact, after all. It was extremely tough. No matter how powerful EXIN was, it was impossible for her to destroy an entire floor of the Tsang, Poseidon Palace, with her presence alone. At this moment, EXIN struck out. She hovered in the air without moving at all. She directly pressed her slender hand towards the samsaric immortal exalt from afar. With this press, the great path immediately appeared, and the laws formed into chains. The space in front of her seemed to be compressed by an unbelievably powerful force, and it directly collapsed, turning into an eternal darkness. At the same time, the collapsing space rapidly extended towards the samsaric immortal exalt at an unbelievable speed. Jinshin became extremely shocked when he personally witnessed EXIN's attack. He had fused the power of his soul with the samsaric immortal exalt's body. EXIN was just too powerful. The height that she stood at had completely exceeded Jinshin's understanding and knowledge. Just a casual strike from her was enough to make the laws appear. Endless mysteries circulated, and the terrifying power directly collapsed the tough space within the Poseidon Palace. The samsaric immortal exalt remained the same as before, but his old eyes still became stern. He pointed a finger at the sky, and the surging power of samsara surged behind him. It turned into 6 huge black holes that formed a wheel of samsara. It hovered above his head and spewed out endless power of samsara. The samsaric immortal exalt and EXIN began to engage in an intense battle within the Poseidon Palace. Energy clashed with energy, and laws collided with laws, creating deafening booms. The space within the Poseidon Palace constantly collapsed. The sky had already been destroyed, reduced to eternal darkness. The ground had already vanished, reduced to a bottomless abyss. The entire Poseidon Palace had almost been pierced through. However, as a strand of Jinshin's soul had fused with the samsaric immortal exalt, he actually felt like he was there when the samsaric immortal exalt fought EXIN. It was as if the person fighting EXIN was not the samsaric immortal exalt, but himself. Not only did he sense the various mysteries of the laws of destruction from EXIN, but he could even vaguely sense the power of samsara that the samsaric immortal exalt used. Aside from that, their control over energy, their usage of laws, and the feeling of fusing with the laws left Jinshin with a deep impression. He benefited greatly. He felt like a door had been opened to him, allowing him to see a whole new world. However, happy times were always short-lived. Jinshin, who was intoxicated by the great joy and greedily absorbed the battle experience of the two sovereigns, only lasted for a few seconds before withdrawing from the state of intoxication. Immediately, a deep sense of exhaustion overwhelmed him. Only now did he realize that the strand of power he had fused with the samsaric immortal exalt soul had become extremely weak. Moreover, he could clearly sense that the samsaric immortal exalt had become extremely weak, so weak that his soul clone had almost dispersed with the wind. Even after stabilizing himself under the samsaric immortal exalt's forceful control, he could not last for much longer. He was on the brink of collapse. Before him, EXIN bathed in the multicolored light as she stood there unscathed. The laws of the world revolved around her, making her seem like a supreme goddess. She was otherworldly and otherworldly, untainted by the mortal world. The samsaric immortal exalt was not EXIN's opponent in the end. After all, EXIN was so powerful that she was only a single step away from achieving great perfection. She was one of the few supreme experts in the Saint's world, an existence that stood at the apex of the pyramid, second only to grand exalts. Although the samsaric immortal exalt was one of the grand exalts of the immortal's world, he was naturally not EXIN's opponent with just his soul clone. Although Old Man doesn't have a good impression of you because you cultivate the chaotic body, You really might be extraordinary since the sword spirits have chosen you. I hope you really will be like what the sword spirits have said in the future and create miracles." At this moment, the samsaric immortal exalt's voice rang out in Jinshan's soul. Even though his soul was about to disperse, his voice was still powerful. They were communicating through their minds. Even if Exen, who possessed great cultivation, was nearby, she would not be able to sense the voice at all. There's one more thing that you must remember. The Pernite, or on the 8th floor of the Poseidon Palace, cannot end up in the hands of the people of the Saints' World. Although the Pernite, or is only a high-quality god-tier material, it's one of the essential materials for forging a superweapon. This superweapon is not a product of this aeon. It has a long history that can be traced back to the previous aeon, or even the aeon before that. Its power is beyond the imagination of the experts of this age. Once it's forged, the immortals' world and the demons' world will be in trouble. In the past, the old man ventured into the saints' world alone and destroyed the Taoist sect of Neptunia single-handedly, because the Taoist sect of Neptunia possessed a large amount of Pernite Oregon. Even the old man's soul clone here mainly came for the Pernite Oregon. As for planting demonic seeds in the people behind the supreme divine king through the threads of karma, that was only the second reason. Originally, the old man wanted to use the threads of karma to plant demonic seeds in the people behind the divine king before thinking of a way to destroy the Pernite or directly take it away. However, what the old man never thought was that the peak experts of the saints' world would still arrive so quickly even after the old man had disrupted the heavenly secrets and prevented the grand exalts of the saints' world from divining. The old man did not have enough time to complete all of this. As a result, the old man can only leave the unfinished business to you. There's a person with a soul residing in a formation flag in the Neptunian mountains. You have their threads of karma, so you should know about their existence. If you can defeat them, you have to find a way to kill them before they leave the Neptunian mountains. If they die, even if the Pernite or ends up in the hands of the people of the saints' world, it'll only be a decent material. It'll prevent the immortals' world from facing this super weapon in the future. After the samsaric immortal exalt said that, Jinshan immediately felt his soul ache slightly. As the world spun around him, he directly lost his connection with the strand of soul. His strand of soul had dissipated along with the samsaric immortal exalt's soul clone. Chapter 22-28. Although Jinshan had lost a strand of his soul, everything he had experienced after fusing with the samsaric immortal exalt was completely reflected back to his original body, allowing him to remember everything clearly. The samsaric immortal exalt's clone had vanished, while the Ixen hovered in the air, completely unscathed. She had already withdrawn the torrential presence that she gave off. At that moment, no one could sense her cultivation at all apart from the fact that the light around her was still as strong as before. The power of samsara that permeated the Poseidon Palace rapidly dispersed after being purified by the glow from Yexen. Wherever the glow passed by, the power of samsara would disperse. In the blink of an eye, not a single strand of the power of samsara remained in the huge Poseidon Palace. It was not just the 9th floor. Even the power of samsara on the other 11 floors had been purified by the glow. Without the suppression of the power of samsara, the supreme god kings who had fainted on the 9th floor all woke up. Having lost most of their vital energies, they were clearly extremely weak. Even the effortless act of standing up was extremely difficult for them now. What happened? That's strange. Why did I faint? As soon as they woke up, all of their eyes were filled with confusion, as if they could not remember what had happened earlier. Jinshan opened his eyes as well. He shook his rather groggy head and slowly stood up as well. He glanced around and saw Shangwan Mu, Ming Dong, Aladona, Shui Yunlan, Rui Di, Ji, and so on. They all woke up as well, standing up with great difficulty. "Are you all right?" Jinshan endured the true powerlessness that filled him as he made his way over with great difficulty. He asked in concern. Jinshan was the same as the divine king in the surroundings. He had also lost a large amount of vital energies, so he was extremely weak right now. The samsaric immortal exalt did not return the vital energies to him. However, Jianxun understood that the reason why the samsaric immortal exalt did not return the vital energies to him was because he did not want him to stand out from the others. Otherwise, if everyone here had been drained of their essence, energy, and spirit, and was in a weakened state, and only he was unharmed, it would naturally attract the attention and suspicion of this peerless master in front of him. This would bring him many unnecessary problems, and he might even expose his identity. However, even with that being the case, Jianxun still felt uneasy. He was extremely nervous. He knew just how powerful the woman hovering in the air was. Before a supreme expert like that, he was not completely confident that he could hide his secret. Once the existence of the sword spirits was exposed, the consequences would be unthinkable. So close. It really was close this time. We almost died here. The existence of that power can actually cut off all methods of communication. I didn't even have the chance to ask my 8th senior sister for help. Ming Dong stood up from the ground in a haggard manner as he said with lingering fear, "Oomph." At this moment, a cold snort suddenly rang out. Only now did everyone else aside from Jianxun notice the woman who hovered in the air and bathed in dazzling light. At this moment, she seemed to have become a scorching sun. She illuminated the surroundings, turning the dark Poseidon Palace into day. No one could see her face clearly. They could only vaguely see a hazy, peerless beauty. At this moment, Exen hovered high in the sky. She completely ignored the supreme divine king in the surroundings. She only glared at Ming Dong and said coldly, "Your soul is injured, and your vitality is depleted. If it weren't for the assistance of the pill, you probably wouldn't have survived until now. Just a single trip to the Poseidon Palace almost cost you your life. You really do know how to bring honor to the heavenly palace of Bishing." Ming Dong immediately felt like he was being stabbed by needles under Exion's glare. However, he showed no fear. He raised his head to meet Exion's gaze and said, "And who are you? What does the matters of our heavenly palace of Bishing have to do with you?" As Ming Dong spoke, the 5 divine generals behind him bowed respectfully and said in unison, "Your subordinates greet the First Highness." The First Majesty? Ming Dong was stunned when he heard the voices of the 5 divine generals. Even all the supreme divine king gathered there became stunned. Shock filled their faces. The First Majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing was a name that resounded like thunder in their ears. She was a supreme expert who stood at the apex of the saints' world. She was a terrifying figure who could make the ancestors of many peak organizations suffocate. At the same time, it was also because of her existence that the heavenly palace of Bishing was able to remain standing in the saints' world despite losing the Enata Grand Prime. At this moment, the supreme figure who was only a legend in the eyes of all the supreme god kings had actually appeared before them. All of them were overjoyed. Greetings to the First Majesty. Aside from Ming Dong, everyone gathered there bowed politely. Even Aladona and Shui Yinlan bowed. In order to not stand out, Jianxun copied everyone else and bowed towards Exian. "You're the first senior sister?" Ming Dong stared at Exian blankly as he asked in surprise. In reality, he had never seen his mysterious first senior sister before. However, when the supreme god kings heard Ming Dong refer to them as the first senior sister, they immediately felt like they had been struck by a bolt of lightning. It stunned all of them as their hearts churned. They were quite frightened by Ming Dong's words. They could all tell that Ming Dong was connected to the heavenly palace of Bishing from how the 5 divine generals protected him, but none of them knew the exact details. However, none of them dared to imagine that Ming Dong's relationship with the heavenly palace of Bishing would actually be so shocking. He had actually directly referred to the First Majesty as the first senior sister. Everyone knew exactly what this meant. This made them all tremble in fear. Following this, their gazes towards Ming Dong underwent a drastic change. Chapter 22-29. Jianxun let out a sigh of relief after Exian left. In reality, he felt very uneasy when he faced such an expert at such a close distance. Fortunately, Xian had never paid any attention to him, much less paid any attention to him. She completely treated him like air. Perhaps that was why the sword spirits did not reveal themselves to Xian, because he knew that with Xian's peerless cultivation, if she really wanted to seriously investigate him, then he wouldn't have the slightest secret to speak of. The difference between them was just too great. They were not on the same level at all. Even if he wanted to hide, he would not be able to. That was close. Only now did Jianshin suddenly discover that his forehead was covered in fine beads of sweat. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how nervous he had been earlier. I still need to increase my strength as soon as possible. Only personal strength is the foundation of everything. Moreover, the more powerful I am, the more confident I will be in being able to hide myself before these experts so that they won't be able to see through all my secrets with a single glance. Jinshin's eyes were determined as he secretly made up his mind. Jinshin, this is a divine pill of chaotic heavens. It's specially used to replenish vitality. At this moment, Ming Dong arrived beside Jinshin and passed a thumb-sized pill to Jinshin. It's actually a divine pill of chaotic heavens. That a 5th grade god-tier pill. It's extremely precious. The supreme divine kings in the surroundings immediately cried out when they saw the divine pill of chaotic heavens. Their eyes lit up as they became filled with envy. Clearly, the divine pill of chaotic heavens was so precious that even with their background and origins, they would be moved by it. Only Ming Dong, who is the 9th majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, was wealthy enough to look down on a 5th grade god-tier pill. There's no need. I have quite a few god-tier heavenly resources here. They're not necessarily worse than your divine pill of chaotic heavens. Jianshin took out a few god-tier heavenly resources from his space ring with a smile. At the same time, Shui Yunlan, Aladona, Rue D, and Ji all pulled out god-tier pills from their space rings and began to recover their vitality. Even Shangwan Mu had god-tier pills on her. Although they were not as good as Ming Dong's divine pills, they were still extremely precious. Jianshan, these heavenly resources of yours are bitter and forceful. They're very difficult to absorb and refine. They're not as gentle as pills at all. Just use my pill, Shangwan Mu, or passed a jade bottle to Jianshan as concern filled her eyes. Hearing this, Jianshan chuckled and said, "Don't forget that my cultivation method is special. Absorbing the medicinal power of these treasures might be difficult for others, but for me, it's effortless. All right, everyone, hurry up and recover. We still have to hurry on with our journey." With that, Jianshin wolfed down the heavenly resources he remembered and began to recover. However, he was filled with doubt. He thought about what the Samsaric Immortal Exalt had said in the end. I really never thought that the true reason for the destruction of the Taoist sect of Neptunia would be the Pernite or on the 8th floor. However, why does the Samsaric Immortal Exalt want me to kill Chanlong no matter what? He even said that as long as Chanlong is dead, even if the Pernite or ends up in the hands of the Saints' world, it won't be able to pose a threat to the Immortals' world for a short period of time. Could it be that Chanlong is directly related to whether or not the Pernite or can be refined into a superweapon? Or is it because Chanlong is the only one in the entire Saints' world who can forge the supreme weapon from the Pernite? Or, if that's really the case, it makes sense why the Samsaric Immortal Exalt wants me to kill Chanlong. It's just that Chanlong is only a divine king right now. Can he accomplish something that all the Grand Primes and even Grand Exalts in the Saints' world can't? Jianshin sank into his thoughts as he recovered. He pondered silently. Suddenly, Jianshan shuddered, and he snapped open his eyes. He stared in the direction of the Neptunian mountains deeply as he became surprised and doubtful. The Neptunian mountains, the Grand Exalts formation. Several million kilometers away in the Neptunian mountains, Chanlong and the huge python remained at the top of the mountain. They did not move at all. The vast Neptunian mountains was extremely silent, as if the two of them were the only ones that existed. However, it was calm here, and the energy was abundant. EXIN's battle against the Samsaric Immortal Exalt did not affect this place at all. It was like a completely different world compared to the violent and devastating scene outside. Neither Chanlong nor the python beside him said anything. They stared ahead as shock filled their eyes. They were in the Neptunian mountains, so they were not affected by the battle. However, the terrifying disturbance from several million kilometers away still made them shiver in fear. At that moment, EXIN's figure silently appeared outside the boundary of the Neptunian mountains. When she appeared, the light had completely faded away, revealing her original appearance. Her white clothes were purer than snow, and she possessed an extraordinary bearing. She had a serious expression, yet possessed a unique charm. Her gaze was deep like a vast river of stars, and it seemed as if a myriad of laws were interwoven within her eyes and were developing the true meaning of the Grand Tao. Moreover, her body even carried an indisputable, dignified aura that seemed to have already surpassed everything. As she spoke, she could split the heavens and the earth apart and decide the fate of all living beings, and she belonged to the type of supreme existence. However, at this moment, she showed some respect. She looked at Chanlong and the soul beside him with mixed feelings. She bowed slightly and said politely, "Junior, EXIN greets Senior Gu Dao." Chanlong and the serpent looked at each other. They could see the confusion in each other's eyes. They did not know who EXIN was, but they could vaguely sense that the woman before them was extraordinarily terrifying and powerful. However, at this moment, this woman's words and actions were puzzling. Perhaps because she could see the doubt in Chanlong and the python's eyes, EXIN sighed gently and said, "In the past, when the Samsaric Immortal Exalt of the Immortals world destroyed the Taoist sect of Neptunia, Senior fought against the Samsaric Immortal Exalt. In the end, Senior's soul was shattered by the Samsaric Immortal Exalt, where it was scattered to different places." EXIN looked at Chanlong and the python and continued, "Now, Master has only found a part of Senior's soul and a part of Senior's soul. She specially sent me to receive Senior and ask Senior to come to the heavenly palace of Bishing. Master will help Senior recover as soon as possible. Perhaps Senior still doesn't know who you are, but Master is already helping Senior search for your scattered soul. Master is very resourceful, and since she has personally taken action, I'm sure she will be able to find Senior's remaining soul very soon." Chapter 2230. On the 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, Jinshan brought Shengwan Mu Shui Yunlan, Aladona, Mingdong, Rue Di, and Ji back to the highest floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. After setting foot on the 12th floor, Jinshan looked at the 4 statues of Grand Primes that stood in the distance as he sighed emotionally inside. At that moment, he could not help but think about the first time he had come to the 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. At that time, he could not expose his identity, so he had to change his appearance and enter with an extremely low profile. In order to prevent people from recognizing him, he even had to avoid places where people gathered. He did not dare to get too close to the 4 statues. But now, when he set foot on the 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace for the second time, an extremely powerful force had already condensed around him. Not only was there Shui Yunlan and Aladona, but there was also Rue Di and Ji, who had made it to the top 10 of the Divine King's thrones. Without a doubt, the battle prowess they possessed in the Tsang Poseidon Palace was the most powerful. The number of people on the 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace had decreased drastically. There were only a few dozen people scattered around the statues. Clearly, these people had never left the 12th floor, nor did they take part in the struggle for the girl. Of course, this did not mean they did not have any thoughts about the girl. Instead, it was because they understood their own strength, so they did not dare to compete with the supreme god kings who ranked toward the top of the rankings. However, these divine kings were also extremely weak right now. The power of samsara had sapped away a large amount of their vital energies. They were currently recovering as quickly as they could through various pills and heavenly resources. Awaken the artifact spirit of the zither of the demonic cry first. I'll look around nearby and see if I can find the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Jianshan stopped before the 4 statues and turned to Shangwan Mu'er. Shangwan Mu'er nodded. She found an empty spot and sat down. She took out the zither of the demonic cry and controlled it to absorb the mysterious energy in the surroundings again. We still haven't recovered all our energy, so we won't be going with you. If you need us to take action, just contact us, Rui Di said to Chun. Afterwards, he found a place nearby with Ji Yi and continued to recover. Brother, I need to hurry up and recover as well. I've just been scolded by first senior sister. I don't want to face 8th senior sister's criticism after I get out, Ming Dong said with a wry smile. Without a doubt, he was the most heavily injured person among them. If it were not for the large number of god-tier pills he had on him, it would have been very difficult for him to survive until now. Even if he managed to survive, his cultivation would have regressed. After all, he had used far too many powerful secret techniques. He had exceeded the limits of what he could endure long ago, so he was severely drained. Afterwards, Jianshan left by himself. Even Shui Yunlan and Aladona did not go with him. Instead, they remained there to recover. Everyone in the Poseidon Palace was affected by the power of Samsara now. They had lost a large amount of vital energies, so they were unable to pose a threat to Jianshan in the short term. Moreover, the truly powerful Divine King was still on the 10th floor, so the 12th floor was extremely safe right now. Bang! 1,000,000 kilometers away from the Grand Prime statue, a heavy sound rang out. An extremely damaged tower covered in sword slashes slammed into the ground with an unimaginable weight, causing the ground to tremble violently. Xiaoman emerged from the tower. Her large, innocent eyes were filled with unease and eagerness as she studied the surroundings. In the end, her gaze landed on Jianshan, and she immediately became worried. She asked in concern, "Brother Jianshan, what's wrong? Are you fine?" "I'm fine. This is the highest floor of the Poseidon Palace." "Xiaoman, take this pendant and see if you can find the artifact spirit," said Jianshan. In order to make time, he had only recovered 30% of his vital energies before rushing to the 12th floor of the Poseidon Palace. As a result, he was pale and haggard. Clearly, he was also in a weakened state. "Okay, I'll try right now." Xiaoman accepted the jade pendant from Jianshan and bit her finger in a practiced manner, dripping a droplet of blood on it. The blood was absorbed by the jade pendant, but Jianshan and Xiaoman waited for a very long time, but they still failed to find any traces of the artifact spirit. Has the artifact spirit already died? Jianshan's heart sank when he saw this. He thought of the voice of the artifact spirit from the Poseidon Palace before the samsaric immortal exalt had appeared. If the artifact spirit really had died, it would be impossible for Xiaoman to take back the Poseidon Palace with her strength, let alone Xiaoman. Even if all the Divine King and the Poseidon Palace worked together, they would still be unable to obtain the Poseidon Palace. This was because he already knew that the center of the Poseidon Palace was in a region that was not open to the public. Apart from gaining the recognition of the artifact spirit, he needed to overcome the obstructions with great strength. Let alone the Divine King. Even some weaker Grand Primes would not be able to harm a high-quality god artifact with the toughness of a high-quality god artifact. This was unless they encountered a peak expert like the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. Jianshan deeply furrowed his brows. He had no idea what to do about the problem he was facing right now. I can sense the presence of Master's bloodline again. Fantastic. Master's descendant didn't die to the samsaric immortal exalt. At the same time, an excited mental pulse appeared from an unknown place in the Poseidon Palace. Here, in a large net completely condensed from energy, there was a powerful will that was tightly bound inside. The ancient will struggled tenaciously. It did its best to resist, causing the net of energy to loosen at a speed visible to the naked eye. The ancient will was naturally the artifact spirit of the Poseidon Palace that Jianshan and the others had been searching for. Although I don't know what's happening outside, I can't sense the presence of the samsaric immortal exalt anymore. He should have vanished from the world already. Since I've lost control of the samsaric immortal exalt, This secret technique can forget about trapping me. Break! The artifact's spirit bellowed out, and a powerful energy immediately surged out. It pierced the net like an arrow and created a hole in it, allowing it to finally connect with the Poseidon Palace again. Chapter 2231. Brother Jianshun, are we unable to find the artifact's spirit? Somewhere on the 12th floor of the Tsang Poseidon Palace, Xiao Man sat on the ground rather powerlessly. She used her hands to support her chin as she stared at Jianshun helplessly. Her pitiful appearance was heart-wrenching. In the past few days, they had been to many places. Not only had Jianshun taken Xiao Man to every place on the 12th floor, but they had even left their footprints on the 11th floor below. They had tried everything they could think of to find the artifact's spirit in different places, but it was to no avail. It seemed like the method Xiao Man had used to disturb the artifact's spirit the first time had completely failed. Jianshun stood beside Xiao Man like a sword stabbed into the ground. An invisible sword intent radiated from him. At this moment, he raised his head to look at the pitch-black sky of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. His gaze was extremely deep as he said softly, Xiao Man, the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace might have fallen. Little guy, who did you say had fallen? However, just when Jianshun had finished speaking, an old voice rang out from nowhere. It was filled with great dissatisfaction. The sudden voice immediately shocked Jianshun. He turned his head and saw a short old man who was only 4 feet tall, barely reaching Jianshun's chest, appear beside Jianshun without any warning. He raised his head slightly and stared at Jianshun angrily. Behind the old man was Xiao Man, who sat on the ground. The old man just happened to be standing between Jianshun and Xiao Man, separating the two of them. You are? Jianshun's eyes narrowed as he stared at the old man in shock. This was because he could not sense any presence from the old man at all. When he scanned with his soul, there was no one before him. He could only discover his existence with his naked eye. Jianshun knew the identity of the short old man in almost an instant. He had to be the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace without a doubt. Little guy, watch what you say next time. If you say anything else, I'll make it so that you'll never be able to walk out of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. I'll trap you here for the rest of your life, the short old man said angrily with a stern face. He was threatening Jianshun. Jianshun stared at the old man without saying anything. Clearly, he was extremely surprised that the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace was still alive. You didn't die at the hands of the samsaric immortal exalt? After a while, Jianshun asked in surprise. However, as soon as Jianshun said that, the short old man leapt up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He immediately jumped up from the ground and swung his hand towards Jianshun's head. He yelled furiously, "Little bastard, what are you saying? Do you know how to speak? Do you believe that I won't kill you with a single slap? In the Neptunian Divine Palace, I am the ruler. Does that old bastard from the samsaric want to kill me with just a clone? Little bastard, are you trying to piss me off or are you looking down on me?" Jianshun's head was firmly slapped by the short old man. The short old man was the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. In the Tsang Poseidon Palace, he was like a god. Jianshun could not resist at all. Fortunately, the old man's slap did not contain any power, so although it landed firmly on Jianshun's head, it did not injure Jianshun. Uncle, are you the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace? Xiao Man also stood up from the ground and stared at the short old man in surprise. She was actually a head taller than the short old man when she stood there. The short old man no longer paid any attention to Jianshun. He turned around and looked at Xiao Man. As he sensed the presence of Xiao Man's bloodline, his expression gradually became mixed. There was heavy sorrow as well. Correct. I am the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. The short old man admitted his identity. He looked at Xiao Man with extremely mixed feelings and said, "Back then, after the samsaric immortal exalt destroyed the Taoist sect of Neptunia, I fell into a slumber due to my heavy injuries. Even now, I still haven't completely recovered. If it weren't for Master's bloodline, which awakened me with Master's bloodline, I probably would have remained in a slumber for a very long time. However, I never thought that the samsaric immortal exalt would actually leave behind a clone of his soul in the divine palace. As a result, as soon as I awakened from my slumber a few years ago, I was attacked by the samsaric immortal exalt. He originally wanted to disperse my consciousness and take the Tsang Poseidon Palace for himself. The samsaric immortal exalt was powerful, one of the 5 grand exalts of the immortals world, but he only left behind a clone of his soul. He was dreaming if he wanted to disperse my consciousness with just a clone, said the artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace. As soon as he mentioned the samsaric immortal exalt, he gritted his teeth and was filled with hatred. Xiao Man remained silent. As soon as she heard the artifact spirit mention the samsaric immortal exalt, she could not help but think of her parents. After entering the Tsang Poseidon Palace, she already knew that the deaths of her parents were inextricably linked to the samsaric immortal exalt. Your father should have been my master's only grandson. Although my master was an expert who stood at the apex of the saints' world and was only second to grand exalts, he had extremely few descendants. He only had a son and a grandson. In the past, when the samsaric immortal exalt attacked the Taoist sect of Neptunia, only his grandson was forcefully sent away by my master with his abilities. He severed his bloodline connection, which was why he was able to avoid the disaster back then. However, the samsaric immortal exalt was just too powerful. He grasped the way of karma, so he could find all the disciples scattered across the entire saints' world through the connections between the disciples of the Taoist sect of Neptunia effortlessly. His power of samsara only needed to extend through the threads of karma, so no matter how far away they were, they would not be able to escape death. The grandson sent away by my master, your father, was also found by the samsaric immortal exalt through the way of karma. Although my master discovered it in time and interfered with it with the power of the ways, forcefully severing all the threads of karma on his grandson from afar, he was still a step too late. A strand of the samsaric immortal exalt's power of samsara had already extended through the threads of karma. The artifact spirit of the Tsang Poseidon Palace sighed gloomily. She looked at Xiao Man with mixed feelings and said, "You can already imagine the result. Although your father's cultivation was not weak in the past, the difference was just too great when compared to the samsaric immortal exalt. Not only would his cultivation regress after being corroded by the power of samsara, but he would also age day by day. His vitality would rapidly drain away. However, since your father was able to last until now and even leave behind the power of your bloodline, it must be said that it's a miracle. The samsaric immortal exalt is one of the 5 grand exalts of the immortals world. Due to master's interference, there's only an extremely tiny amount of the power of samsara he left in your father's body. However, logically speaking, it's impossible for your father to last until now. It looks like someone has helped your father in the past as well." A sliver of surprise appeared in the artifact's spirit's eyes. Xiao Man was already covered in tears when she heard about her parents' deaths again. She sobbed softly and gritted her teeth. "My father, mother, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all killed by the samsaric immortal exalt. He's an evil person, a great evil person. If I have enough strength in the future, I will definitely take revenge for my father, mother, grandfather, and great-grandfather that I've never met. I'll kill my enemy with my own hands." At this moment, a seed of hatred had been planted in Xiao Man's heart. The samsara immortal venerate had killed her entire family, so her hatred for the samsara immortal venerate was extremely deep. Chapter 22:32. Jianshun could not help but think of his encounter with the samsaric immortal exalt when he saw Xiao Man's hate-filled gaze and how he had selflessly imparted the way of karma to him. This made him sigh inside. He knew that Xiao Man might never be able to reach the grand exalt's level in her entire life. Finding the samsaric immortal exalt for revenge might only be an extravagant hope for her. It was impossible, but he could not bear to plant a seed of hatred in Xiao Man's heart at such a young age. I wonder if helping Xiao Man obtain the Poseidon Palace was the right thing to do. Jianshun stared at the artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon silently with mixed feelings. However, he remained calm on the surface, afraid that the artifact spirit who had lived for who knows how many years would notice something. The artifact spirit of the Poseidon Palace of Poseidon's expression deepened. Her old eyes also shone with surging hatred as she said with a heavy voice, "This enmity must be avenged." Although Little Master might not be the Samsaric immortal exalt opponent in her entire life, there are many ways to take revenge. The artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon stared deeply at Xiao Man and said, "Let's talk about revenge in the future. The most important thing right now is for Little Master to grasp the Palace of Poseidon as soon as possible." "Can I grasp the Palace of Poseidon now?" Xiao Man asked. Before she had learnt the details of her parents' deaths from the artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon, she was filled with anticipation and excitement about controlling the Palace of Poseidon. However, she was unable to become happy no matter what. Her heart was extremely heavy. The artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon coughed gently and said hesitantly, "This is because Little Master is too weak right now, so it's impossible for her to completely grasp a high-quality god artifact like the Palace of Poseidon. As a result, I can only take Little Master to the central region of the Palace of Poseidon so that Little Master can refine the most basic parts of the Palace of Poseidon. Once Little Master refines the most basic parts, she will be able to enter and exit the Palace of Poseidon freely. Of course, Little Master's current cultivation is nowhere near enough to use the Palace of Poseidon against enemies or use the Palace of Poseidon. After all, you need to be a high-quality chaotic prime at the very least, or even a grand prime if you want to use a high-quality god artifact with ease." The artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon looked at Xiao Man, who was nowhere near godhood. He felt helpless. Probably even he had never thought that the only descendant of his master he had waited for after slumbering for so long would actually possess such a low cultivation. As a matter of fact, it could even be described as unsightly. However, Little Master is still young. She has cultivated for far too short a time, which is why her cultivation is so low. The Palace of Poseidon still has a large number of resources and various records. Under my guidance, it won't be difficult for the Little Master to increase her cultivation, thought the artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon. At this moment, Xiao Man could tell that she was about to leave. She said to Jianshan gratefully, "Brother Jianshan, I will never forget your kindness to me. I'll leave with the artifact spirit for a while first. Once I gain some basic control over the Palace of Poseidon, I'll carry out our agreement." Xiao Man paused when she reached there. "Brother Jianshan, since we're safe now, you better let out Sister Xian." Jianshan glanced at the artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon. After hesitating slightly, he took out the Inata Tower in the end and let out Xian. The Inata Tower. The artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon was not something the Supreme Divine King could compare to. He immediately recognized the Inata Tower the moment he saw it, and his face became filled with surprise. His gaze towards Jianshan became rather strange as well. "You little bastard, you sure are lucky. Even one of the three great treasures of the Inata Grand Prime, the Inata Tower, is in your hands. Although I don't know where you obtained the Inata Tower, it's a hot potato. It's not necessarily a good thing for you to have it on you. Let me give you a piece of advice. You better return the Inata Tower to the heavenly palace of Bishing as soon as possible. Once you try to lay your hands on the Inata Tower, the majesties of the heavenly palace of Bishing won't spare you. Return it as soon as possible. Perhaps it will bring you great benefits," the artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon said sincerely. With that, the artifact spirit of the Palace of Poseidon vanished with Xiao Man and Xian, leaving behind Jianshan all by himself. Jianshan sighed gently as he stared at the empty space before him. He left as well, directly making his way to the 9th floor of the Palace of Poseidon. Before long, Jianshan arrived outside the Neptunian Mountains. However, when he arrived there again, what appeared before him was a boundless, desolate land. The Neptunian Mountains that originally stood there had completely vanished. "Heya, find where Chanlong is." Jianshan immediately called out Heya. "Master, I can't sense Chanlong's location anymore. He's either been wiped out or has left the Palace of Poseidon," said Heya. Jinshin stared at the desolate land that stretched as far as the eye could see and sank into his thoughts. At the same time, the experts from the various peak clans and organizations of the Saints' world had already gathered outside the Palace of Poseidon in the dark, cold, and desolate space. They all dispersed and gathered outside the entrance of the Palace of Poseidon. They stared at the Palace of Poseidon as they discussed among themselves. Without any exception, all of them were primordial realm experts. There were quite a few chaotic primes as well. As they gathered there, they gave off a terrifying, ocean-like presence that actually caused the space there to distort. Even further away were countless spaceships. Every single one of them had a person standing on the deck. They also stared at the Palace of Poseidon that stood silently, like a primordial beast. What happened in the Palace of Poseidon? Not only did the Supreme Divine King under the Divine King die en masse, but a Supreme Expert even suddenly descended afterwards. She broke through the various formations of the Palace of Poseidon with her terrifying cultivation and forced her way in. Who is that woman who shines with light? Her strength is just too terrifying. Even with my cultivation as a peak infinite prime, I still feel fear when I face her. All the primordial realm experts discussed among themselves as they felt very uneasy. The formations in the Palace of Poseidon are so powerful that they can stop grand primes. Yet that senior actually entered in just a few seconds. Is she a legendary Grand Exalt? What? A Grand Exalt? The hearts of all the primordial realm experts present shuddered when they heard the mention of Grand Exalt. They were shocked. Grand Exalts were legendary existences in their eyes. They were existences that controlled the laws of the world. They were truly supreme. She's not a Grand Exalt, but she's not far away. If Old Man has guessed correctly, she should be the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing. An aged voice sounded. The person who spoke was an old man wearing a gray robe and carrying a long sword on his back. The old man had his eyes closed and was sitting cross-legged on a huge meteorite. His aura was restrained, and he looked like an ordinary person. However, when all the primordial realm experts gathered there looked at the old man, they all showed fear. Solitary Sword Ancestor, I never thought you'd actually come here as well. At this moment, a booming voice boomed out from the depths of outer space. The terrifying sound waves ripped through space, causing huge, pitch-black cracks to appear. A huge pung shone with dazzling, azure light as it flew over from the depths of outer space. It moved with unbelievable speed, as if space had no concept of distance before it. It could cross billions of kilometers in a single instance. In a previous moment, it was still in the depths of outer space, but in the next moment, it had already arrived outside the Palace of Poseidon. It moved so quickly that it seemed like teleportation. Chapter 22:33. The Azure Pung King appeared in his original form. Just like his name, he was an extremely huge azure pung. Every single feather flickered with azure light and was as tough as dragon scales. They pulsed with extremely powerful and terrifying energy. He hovered silently in outer space like a colossal meteor. Even the majestic Poseidon Palace was not even a tenth the size of the Azure Pung King's original form. Heavens, I never thought that the person sitting on the meteor would actually be the legendary Solitary Sword Ancestor. Not only has the Solitary Sword Ancestor come personally, but even the famed Azure Pung King has come, coupled with the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing who entered the Azure Poseidon Palace. Just what has happened to the Azure Poseidon Palace that has attracted the attention of so many experts? The primordial realm experts gathered in outer space discussed fervently. The existence of the Solitary Sword Ancestor and the Azure Pung King had already attracted the gazes of many people. At the same time, they became deeply curious about the shocking changes in the Azure Poseidon Palace. Of course, there were many people with extremely horrible expressions among them. They had already confirmed from the names that had vanished from the Divine King's seat that the prodigies that their clans had nurtured after so much effort, the future pillars of their clans, had died in the Azure Poseidon Palace. This pained them greatly. At this moment, The Azure Pung King's colossal body rapidly shrank, turning into a middle-aged man in azure clothes. His gaze was piercing, and his chiseled face gave off a sense of supremacy. The Azure Pung King was originally several tens of thousand kilometers away from the solitary sword ancestor, but with a slight movement, he appeared before the solitary sword ancestor like he had teleported. He did not set foot on the meteor the solitary sword ancestor sat on. Instead, he stood several hundred kilometers away, gazing at the solitary sword ancestor from afar. 4 top experts at their level. Even if they were separated by millions of miles, they would still be within reach, let alone a distance of a few hundred miles. Solitary sword ancestor. Could it be that your successor has fallen in the blue Poseidon Palace as well? The Azure Pang's voice was firm and forceful, and it was filled with an undisguised wildness. The solitary sword ancestor sat on the meteor without moving at all. His gaze remained calm the entire time, and his expression remained the same. That's right. Old Man's solitary sword lineage has always been sparsely populated. It's very difficult for us to find a suitable successor, even if we traverse the entire Saint's world. It's exactly because of this that even when we reached our peak in history, it was very difficult for us to reach 5 people. In my generation, we only managed to find Gong Zheng, the only successor. Now, he has died in the Poseidon Palace. Old Man has come to investigate the cause of Gong Zheng's death. He wants to see which sex Junior actually dares to not show any respect to my solitary sword lineage. He even wants to kill the only successor that Old Man has found after so much effort. Although the solitary sword ancestor spoke calmly, all the primordial realm experts gathered their subconsciously shivered inside. Clearly, the solitary sword ancestor's calm voice was filled with killing intent. It was extremely powerful. This king's disciple has also died in the blue Poseidon Palace. He was the disciple that I was most satisfied with. This king had extremely high hopes for him, but I never thought that he would actually be killed in the blue Poseidon Palace. The Azure Pung King's face became extremely sunken. Killing intent filled his eyes as a powerful presence permeated the surroundings, causing the space around him to collapse. There's still some time before the blue Poseidon Palace closes, and the opening of the blue Poseidon Palace this time is different from before. The awakening of the artifact spirit might cause the closing of the blue Poseidon Palace to be extended. This king is unwilling to wait here for so long. Solitary sword ancestor, why don't we work together and force our way into the blue Poseidon Palace? The Azure Pung King suggested. The solitary sword ancestor stared at the blue Poseidon Palace deeply. He shook his head gently and said, "You know how powerful the blue Poseidon Palace is as well. It'll be very difficult for us to force our way in with just the 2 of us. Even if we do manage to force our way in, it'll probably take several decades. During that time, the people who have entered the blue Poseidon Palace would have emerged long ago. Moreover, the Blood Tier Grand Exalt has said in the past that unless the artifact spirit of the blue Poseidon Palace accepts you as its master, no one is allowed to set their sights on the blue Poseidon Palace. No one is allowed to force their way in. If you really do that, the Blood Tier Grand Exalt will probably come personally before you even enter the blue Poseidon Palace. After all, we're not the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing," said the solitary sword ancestor. As a high-quality god artifact, the blue Poseidon Palace had remained idle in the Saint's world for so long because of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's warning. The Azure Pung King's eyes immediately narrowed when he heard that. Clearly, the name of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt possessed extraordinary deterrence. Even the unruly Azure Pung King showed deep fear when he heard the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's name. Although the Grand Exalts of the Saints' world rarely interfered with these conflicts, once they made an announcement, it was equivalent to representing the will of the heavens. It was like an imperial edict, truly supreme, where no one dared to disobey. This person is the murderer of my successor. May I ask if any of you recognize which organization he belongs to? There's still some time before the blue Poseidon Palace opens, so I'll pay a visit to the organization behind him first, the Azure Pung King said coldly. The Azure Pung King said coldly. Powerful killing intent radiated from him without any disguise at all. Afterwards, he extended a finger, and the space before him immediately became like a mirror, projecting the scene of all the supreme god kings pursuing Jianshun. However, there were too many people in the surroundings, blocking the view. As a result, it was impossible to find any traces of Jianshun. Moreover, apart from a pale-faced, haggard young man, everyone else was a blur. Right at this moment, the pale young man with a dispirited expression stabbed over with a sword in his hand. The image came to a stop there. It was not difficult to tell that it was what Mo Chang had seen in the final moment before his death. The Azure Pung King used a unique secret technique to display everything that Mo Chang had seen before his death in its entirety. The primordial realm experts gathered in the surroundings all shook their heads. None of them knew who Mo Chang's murderer was or where he came from. Even some of the people who were in charge of gathering intelligence had never seen or heard of this person before. Chapter 2234. None of the primordial realm experts gathered here recognized the person who had killed the Azure Pung King's disciple, Mo Chang. Behind the primordial realm experts, a curvaceous woman with a veil stood on the deck of one of the spaceships hovering in outer space. She had also seen what the Azure Pung King had recorded through a secret technique from afar. However, when she saw the appearance of Mo Chang's murderer, she immediately shuddered slightly. She said softly, "How can it be him?" The woman's voice was extremely soft, just like a mosquito. However, the Azure Pung King had been paying close attention to the surroundings since long ago. Even from very far away, he could hear the woman's soft murmurs clearly even without using the senses of his soul with his current level of cultivation. With a single movement, the Azure Pung King crossed the distance and appeared on the woman's spaceship like he had teleported. "You recognize this person?" The Azure Pung King stared at the veiled woman coldly. A terrifying pressure permeated the surroundings, causing the spaceship to totter. Countless formations appeared with a flash, unleashing the defenses of the spaceship. However, under the Azure Pung King's pressure, the spaceship still seemed like it was about to shatter even after activating the formations. "Please calm down, Senior Pung King. This is the princess of our 1,000 Lotus Empire, Yun Xiaoyan. Please don't make things difficult for the sake of the 1,000 Lotus Ancestor, Senior Pung King." An old woman arrived before the veiled woman in a flash and said humbly. She was also a primordial realm expert, but she was only an infinite prime. I don't care if you're from the 1,000 Lotus Empire or the Myriad Lotus Empire. Let me ask you, do you recognize the person who killed my disciple?" The Azure Pung King stared at the veiled Yun Xiaoyan coldly. He did not take the 1,000 Lotus Empire seriously at all. Yun Xiaoyan greets Senior Pung King. However, Senior Pung King has misunderstood. "I don't recognize this person, nor do I know his origins." Yun Xiaoyan bowed towards the Azure Pung King with difficulty under the tremendous pressure. Do you really think I'm that easy to fool?" The Azure Pung King snorted coldly. His eyes were extremely frightening. At the same time, the spaceship that Yun Xiaoyan occupied began to tremble violently. With a few heavy explosions, many of the defenses of the spaceship were actually shattered by the Azure Pung King's presence. Yun Xiaoyan's spatial battleship was of an impressive grade, so the defensive formations were not weak either. They could easily block the attacks of infinite primes, but they were as fragile as toys before the Azure Pung King. "Tell this king everything you know about this person. This king has many methods to get everything this king wants to know from you. You better not force this king to take action." The Azure Pung King's voice was chilling. Killing intent revolved around him, causing the surrounding space to seem like it had been frozen for 10,000 years. Whether it was the old woman or the veiled Yun Xiaoyan on the spatial battleship, they both paled under the pressure of the Azure Pung King's presence. "Senior Pung King, you're an expert of the senior generation, yet you're bullying a weak woman who's only a divine king without any regard for your status. If this matter makes it out, it'll probably damage Senior Pung King's reputation." At this moment, a gentle female voice rang out. A woman in a red dress with an otherworldly bearing appeared on the spatial battleship out of thin air. The woman was so beautiful that she could outshine the moon. However, she had clearly concealed her presence, so she seemed like an ordinary person right now. She faced the Azure Pung King calmly. The Azure Pung King's face sank slightly when he saw the woman. He said, "So, with the 8th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing, what? Is the 8th Majesty meddling in other people's business?" Immediately, all the primordial realm experts gathered their gazes when they heard that the 8th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing was present. Even the solitary sword ancestor who sat on the meteor could not help but pay attention. Not long ago, the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing had barged into the Azure Poseidon Palace as if she was invincible. Her unstoppable presence had deeply shocked everyone present. As a result, under the radiance of the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing, everyone feared the 8th Majesty, even though she had not reached the peak of cultivation as her junior sister. "Senior Pung King, you're exaggerating. I just happen to have some questions for Yin Xiaoyan as well. I wonder if Senior Pung King would mind?" The 8th Majesty smiled gently. Although she was asking for the Azure Pung King's opinion, she actually did not wait for his reply. She turned to Yin Xiaoyan and said, "Yin Xiaoyan, I wonder if you'd mind paying a visit to my divine hall?" With that, she seemed like she wanted to take Yin Xiaoyan away. Yin Xiaoyan and the old woman both felt flattered by the 8th Majesty's invitation. 8th Majesty, do you really think you can do whatever you want and look down on me just because you have the support of your first senior sister?" The Azure Pung King said with a sunken face. If it were not for the fact that he feared the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing, he would never allow a chaotic prime to act so arrogantly before him. "Senior Pung King, if you want to find your disciple's murderer, you can just wait until he emerges from the Azure Poseidon Palace. Why make things difficult for the innocent? Yin Xiaoyan, let's go." The 8th Majesty left the spatial battleship with Yin Xiaoyan under the Azure Pung King's murderous gaze. "Yin Xiaoyan, I want to know what happened in the Azure Poseidon Palace. You could tell me everything." The 8th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing sat on a piece of jade in a majestic divine hall. He looked at Yin Xiaoyan and said, "Don't tell me that you've never entered the Neptunian Divine Palace. Although you're not someone who came out of the Neptunian Divine Palace, there are some things that you can't hide from me." Yin Xiaoyan became bitter when she heard that. She knew that the majesties of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing were all people with great abilities. They knew many ancient, powerful secret techniques and could see through many secrets. Even if she wanted to hide something before people like that, she probably did not have the ability to do so. As a matter of fact, they would know whether she was lying or not. 8th Majesty, although my second body did enter the Azure Poseidon Palace, she died soon afterwards. As a result, I don't know much about what happened in there. Yin Xiaoyan did not dare to hide anything from the 8th Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. She told her everything she knew, including Ming Dong.